Road. Well, welcome to the somewhere in Central Florida, obviously, because of how flat and non-hilly everything is. You know, if there's something I've learned, partly why I don't have my mic plugged in yet, which I will right now. There we go. There's something I've learned all the years working in radio and setting up live remotes for broadcasts and stuff. It's that your equipment will break. So at the last second, I'm trying to plug the battery in so this stream lasts longer than, half an hour. And apparently this doesn't work. So I don't know, maybe you know how USB works, but all I know is I had the old kind of connector. So I put an adapter on it for the new kind of connector, USB-C, and this one doesn't work. So, but thankfully I brought two cables. So anyway, Agent Ned says, yo. Toronto Transit says, wait, you're in San Francisco? Have you ridden BART? Yes, I did. In fact, I wrote it down here today because I'm working on a video that probably come out in February. Parking's very expensive in the city, and if I'm here all day filming, then, obviously I don't want to pay $20, $30, $40 to park and $7 for tolls. So it was my first experience riding BART. And I tell you, if you leave it to the hype of the way they make it sound on the news, I was so sure I was going to get stabbed. And BART was just fine. It was a great heavy rail system, kind of reminded me of MARTA in Atlanta, and it was really nice. So Lawrence writes, the way USB works is that whatever the worst element in the chain is how good the connection is. Yeah, I have learned over the years that there are USB cables that are for charging only, and if I'm trying to get data off my phone, then they don't work. Maybe there's some that only work for data and apparently have, Paul Rohrbar is coming in early with a gigantic super chat that's going to feed me very well. He says Uber feeds, and emphasis on Uber because it's a very large super chat. So thank you very much, Paul, for jumping in so early with that. And yes, I am in a neighborhood that they built all the houses crooked. They got that very poor surveying, and my legs are exhausted from standing at an angle, actually. So I'm going to dump out of this bit here in a second, but I just thought it'd be funny. So right up this way is the 101 freeway, and had they built the 101 freeway straight, so if you go to Google Maps, if you're on a desktop computer right now, you'll see that as you approach downtown San Francisco, it's ramrod straight through the south end, south of Market Street, and then there's this hill, and it kind of zigzags around it. And at that point is Portillo's hot dogs. No, Portero Hill. And they obviously didn't want to build the freeway through the hill, so they kind of went up the hill a little bit, went around it, and because they went around it, this second Lombard Street that they built in developers built in 1927 is still here. And if you ever visit San Francisco, or if you live here in the city and you want to experience Lombard Street without the crowds of tourists gawking and doing selfies and doing silly live streams 2 years ago, you can come see this other knockoff Lombard Street that some argue it's actually more crooked than the original Lombard Street. And for that, I went back to a guy named Huell Hauser, who some people, I guess, say I remind him of him a little bit. May he rest in peace. But Huell Hauser was a very talented guy, just really positive, and he went around California, did the show called California's Gold. And he, like 10 or 20 years ago, actually talked to the city of San Francisco, and they got out the old engineering documents and tried to figure out what was more crooked, Lombard Street or this other street we're heading over to in just a minute. And if you look at the radii of each turn in the road, Lombard, I got to learn how to pronounce it right. Lombard Street, that's the way we said it in Portland. Portland has a Lombard Street, but it's Ramrod Street. Lombard Street has tighter radii. The radius is tighter. So in that regard, it's more crooked. But if you think of it as a sine wave of the road going back and forth like this, it has a tight radii, but each leg of Lombard Street is kind of diagonal. So you don't get that many turns in a length. If you take that same length and apply it to this street over here, it turns 90 degrees. So you actually have a higher frequency, I guess you're going to use that terminology. So we're going to go over here and check out the 101 freeway that avoids this fake second, tighter, less touristy Lombard Street, and go check it out while we still have some daylight. So, and real quick, to see, there's a lot of chats coming in here. I just don't want to miss them. Talking about USB stuff still. Have you been to the steepest road in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? Love the contact, writes Magic Conch Shell. Well, I've been to the steepest street in LA, and that ought to be one to look at some point. Let's see. My grandmother used to live in the Potrero Hill neighborhood. That's from David. That's cool. So anyway, let's. You need to rotate your green screen. No green screen. I can actually. Like, I could go touch that car if I wanted to. Okay, so enough of the bit and enough of me standing crooked here. In fact, I'm going to lower this down a little bit so I don't have to. And let's take a look at the neighborhood here. So this is the corner of Utah Avenue and 18th. There's one of my favorite little buses going by. If you caught that real quick, it was. It runs on cable wires, and it blew my mind the first time I saw one 15 years ago. I'm like, wait, why is that bus running on wires? You know, I've seen light rail vehicles do that, but and I still wonder how the bus drivers are skillful enough to not drive off the wires. But maybe we'll take a look at that here in a minute. So this is a city of a lot of flat parts and hilly parts. And something interesting I got thinking of is when it comes to people driving and walking, and especially riding bikes in the city, we always think about taking the shortest path in terms of horizontally. You know, what's the path of least resistance? You see that with the concept of a desired path, with like on a college campus, and everybody walks across the lawn and kills it, and eventually, if the school's a smart school, they'll put a sidewalk there. So it's the horizontal path of least resistance. But in San Francisco, because the hills are so crazy, because somebody thought it'd be great to lay a grid over the top of a city that definitely can't handle a grid vertically, you get paths of least resistance vertically. So certain streets get incredibly busy, especially for people on bikes, because they'd rather go around the hill and ride somewhere flat than go all the way up and all the way back down, even though horizontally that might be the fastest path. And that creates some interesting problems, because then you get certain streets that are desirable for everybody, cars, bikes, everybody else. And on these old cities, there's just not enough room to be able to do everything it is you want to do. So here we are on the top of the 101 freeway, US Highway 101. Getting into rush hour here, obviously, because it's 4 o'clock on the West Coast. And the demand is exceeding capacity. Somebody, Jander writes, that's not a freeway, it's a parking lot. Well, it's a sign of a hot economy, right? You know, if you had everybody bailing out of transportation and you know, unless they're doing work from home or something. It's kind of interesting because they talk about this city being in a doom loop, but the city's so big that when you're looking at, well, what part of the city's doomed? You know, maybe the financial district straight ahead, where you see all the high-rise buildings. Yeah, the rents they were hoping to get on those offices are probably way down. But San Francisco's a giant city. I mean, this neighborhood over here is almost kind of like a Brooklyn, you know, where it's a lot of medium density, 3-story stuff that's really, really dense. Well, it all seems occupied. It seems like it's doing pretty well. So, Paul with another super chat. Thanks again, Paul. Says this is going to be a fun stream. Yeah, San Francisco is such a fascinating city because it's weird. I was thinking about this the other day. I was going, why does this city do things differently than pretty much anywhere else, right? Because Silicon Valley's here doing tech stuff. And I was trying to think, I'm playing armchair sociologist and trying to think through, like, well, what about it makes this city different? And Addie. And when I say the city, I mean the Bay Area in general, right? And I'm thinking, well, okay, does it have to do with the influence of a large, Asian American immigrant population? Because a lot of Southeast Asian cities are very modern, Seoul, Tokyo. And I was thinking, well, maybe, but if that were the case, the maintenance of the city would be like Tokyo, right? Where everything would be power washed. And this is very much an American city. It's dirty and it's gritty. So I'm like, okay, well, that may play a role, but what else could it be? And then I got thinking, this goes way back, like go back to the 1849 when the gold rush happened. These people who came to this city and to this region were people who thought, hey, I know a better way to make money than everybody else. Everybody back east in New York and in St. Louis are suckers. I'm going to go out west and I'm going to get rich and I'm going to show them all. And so I think that if those are the principal ancestors of the non-indigenous people here in this region, is like people who wanted to do something different, and they came out and they did, and then that mindset just sort of never left. And so as we walk around the city today, I'll point out if I see them, there's not just the Waymo cars that have the big LiDAR thing on their roof, but you have like a lot of smaller companies driving around with names I've never heard of that have weird, goofy looking LiDAR things. And I even saw one Prius over on like 20th and Valencia Street that was parked, and I hope it's still parked there if we make our way out that way, that had like a DIY one, and it had no company name on it. And a part of me wondered, is that just some guy who like had $1 million and just on his own, or $100,000 even, and just on his own decided, hey, I've got a Prius, I'm gonna just start putting self-driving stuff on there myself. And that would be such a Bay Area thing to do, of just like this gold rush mindset of like, all those people back east, I'm gonna show them all. So anyway, it makes sense that this city, if commercial real estate is going to collapse because everybody's going to work from home and that becomes a permanent thing despite all the pushing of people getting back to work, it makes sense it would start here, because these are the people who try crazy things, and sometimes a few of them stick and then the rest of us do it. So Toronto Transit Channel writes, San Francisco is not in a doom loop, it's just one area that's not doing well due to work from home, which I think is fair, as well as affordability issues, because I think this now beats New York for the most unaffordable region to live in. And most of the people who have a decent quality of life are people who bought their house a long time ago and they're grandfathered in with a mortgage payment that's reasonable, and everybody else is just, this is a town you can make $200,000 and still feel like you're broke. So Paul with another super chat. Thanks, Paul. You're right. I hate commuting. I founded an engineering firm centered on work from home back in 2013. Our pay was on the lower side, but for people who hated commuting, and it was amazing. COVID changed work from home for better. I tend to agree, and I saw an article the other day that made a good point. People who are being forced back to the office, which I don't understand the logic behind companies, because work from home saves companies money and allows you to attract candidates from all over the world, right? Work from home limits who you can hire, and if you don't pay them more, it becomes kind of a pay cut, because if you take in the time, but the fuel and the parking and the stress, an employer has to make up for that somehow in pay. Otherwise, they're going to burn out and they're going to go work somewhere else. And so I don't get it. I have a friend of mine who lives in the Central Valley who's being forced to commute all the way down to Orange County for a tech job. And it's dumb. So you drive all that stress to drive 3 hours to sit at a different computer, you know? And so, yeah, is this a doom loop? No, in the sense that, like, this is a desirable area, it will come back, but it's having to reinvent itself because the idea that Salesforce in their big tower is going to have 100% return to work, well, that's just not going to happen. People, a lot of people, they bought houses somewhere else, they're not coming back. So, let's see. Steve A writes, managers suck. They don't know how to manage unless they can physically hover over you. Well, bad managers are bad at managing. I've had some, I stuck out a radio job for way too long. Like, I was making McDonald's wages. I had no health insurance, and I kept that job for freaking ever because I had a great manager. He listened to me. My ideas went someplace. And it really goes to show people don't necessarily quit jobs because they're bad. Pay-wise, that was a very bad dead-end job. But I had a really good manager. People quit bad managers. And it's what bothers me is when the manager doesn't care, but it's work from home is the mandate, or return to office is something that comes from down on high. And then the audacity, even more, is that the executives who make that mandate are the type of people who they're working from home, from Florida, you know, where they, you know, get a tax break or whatever. That's fine. Nothing wrong with living in Florida. And but then they're not returning to the office in Chicago because they want to stay living in Florida. But then they mandate all the people living in Chicago go back to the office. Now, like one pizza party is going to make up for that loss in morale? Like employees are not dumb, especially if you're of a company where you're hiring intelligent people. Intelligent people figure this stuff out. So, well, before it gets much darker, real quick, it looked like I had a super chat here. Stephen A writes, good managers aren't forcing them to return to the office. Amen. Pete Martin writes, California will always be a paradise to live in as long as they can get water. And I would add, secondly, if you're lucky to have a friend or family member you can rent from who bought a long time ago, and so they can keep your price low. Okay, so let's start. I thought there was a super chat. Oh, Paul again. Thank you, Paul. Paul writes, we need zoning flexibility. Look to Japan and convert office space into residential space, often not legal under U.S. zoning. And the other issue somebody pointed out to me, Paul, was weight. So when you have an office plan and you have, you know, Herman Miller cubicles and open plan desks and things, the amount of weight per square foot that you put on the building is a lot less than residential. We have bookcases and we have couches and refrigerators and our furniture is a lot more dense. And so you multiply that over the entire floor after floor after floor, and you start running into an issue that the building might not be able to handle the weight. If somebody can figure out a way, in a cost-effective way to convert commercial to residential, they're going to be a billionaire because, I mean, there's just so much demand for residential. It's ridiculous, you know. Let's walk over to the other street. So I'm going to flip the camera around, and so we're coming out on the other side of the hill here. I'm going to drop this down. I'm going to have to tighten up my, in fact, if you don't mind humoring me for a moment, I have to tighten up the tripod thing, or else the phone's going to fall off the... Okay, so I think that's tighter. Okay, so wave goodbye to the 101 freeway. You know, it's funny, I'd see traffic jams like these back before I lived in California, and I'd be horrified. And I'd say, oh my gosh, like, you'll be trapped forever. And now I live in Southern California, and I get jams like that a lot. And you start to realize, you go, well, it doesn't add that much time. I mean, it might add 20 minutes, and you go, well, that's still, you know, it's still a lot that adds up, and especially poor people who have to commute every day. But in the big picture, like 20 minutes isn't as catastrophic as one might think. And I didn't realize that we were not at the top of the hill yet. We still got quite a bit to climb here. It's too bad they don't have a scooter I can rent and scoot to the top. But you'll see at the top of the hill up here is where you come back down the other side. If you go back to, Google around and look up, I believe it's Vermont Street. I wrote it down and I don't have my notes on me. This was back in 1926, a dirt road that just went up the hill. The houses were here, but the road was just dirt. And the 20s were a big time for the changes for the automobile, where instead of walking places, people had the ability to actually buy a Model T and drive somewhere. And that's where you started getting some of the first road taxes. It went from the Automobile Club of California building roads just as a fun novelty for their members, but actually advocating for motor fuel taxes and road bonds to build good stuff. I'm sorry if I'm out of breath. These hills are quite steep. I really thought we were there when we went over the freeway. I didn't realize we had to keep going. So if you go back and find historic photos of the street here, and I think I actually have to go over one more block. It says I'm on San Bruno Street. The road was just dirt going up the hill, and I had a telegraph pole running right down the middle of it. Just kind of interesting to think about. Putting the telephone pole in the middle of the street doesn't make sense when you have a car going 40 miles an hour that can hit it. So we always put our utility poles off to the side. But when people are walking, I suppose it might have made the best sense. So it's interesting to see, and you have the dirt paths going up and down the hill for people to get to their houses. And we all live in pretty good comfort nowadays because almost everybody has access to air conditioning in their house or some type of whole house heating and cooling. But what it must have been like in 1926 to be like, wow, I lived in, I don't know, Connecticut or someplace. They just get ice cold. And then, or somebody lived in St. Louis and it just gets so hot and humid. And then they move out to San Francisco, and all of a sudden they're living in a place that is chilly, but it's California cold. It's not cold. And to realize that they weren't gonna have to deal with the ice or the just out of control swampy heat, and just like realizing they had found this secret, this neat place to live, and everybody else is suffering and they didn't have to. Like I say, people having air conditioning and central heating, kind of, air conditioned cars and things. Oh, come on, we got one more block. I promise I'll catch my breath when we get up here. Whew. Oh, man. I should have just started the stream up here rather than when your job is to talk and you lose the ability to talk, it kind of undermines what you're doing. Vermont. Okay. So this is the top of Lombard Street that only the locals know about. Okay. I have to stop here and catch my breath for just a second. They have a whole nice little park here and everything, Okay. See if I caught up on anything that I missed out on you. Paul writes again, good point on office and residential, but I think there's still too much red tape. Absolutely. Zoning is, I call it tyranny from the bottom up. And no city has an incentive to do the right thing and make building housing easier, because then they'll become the check valve that blows off all this pressure for all the surrounding cities that don't do the right thing. And so they have an incentive nobody wants to be the one to finally pop the bubble, because all the pressure will go out in their city. And, I've always said that about different cities in Southern California. I go, well, what would happen in your city if you can even take San Francisco here, right? Let's say, they want to do the right thing, and say, okay, unlimited density, by right, you can come in, you can knock this house down, you can put up something 5 stories tall. Well, what would happen to Northern California if San Francisco is the only place that by right you're allowed to do that? The entire city would be demolished and rebuilt in 20 years. It just would just... And so, and it's the same of the suburbs. If any one particular suburb allowed easy reconstruction, a lot more creativity for developers, it would just, all the pressure would blow out. And so you end up with this incentive for no city to want to do the responsible thing, even if they believe in doing the responsible thing. And so it's kind of interesting if you look at a state legislature, and they come in and say, we need to make it easier to build housing. On a state level, everybody says, yes, let's do it, because it's good for the state. But if you go to a city council, any city council, you say, should we make it easier to build housing by right and give developers? Oh, no, that'll change the character of the neighborhood. We can't do that. So you end up with it, but then that infects the state level, right? Because you come in, you try to set this powerful state policy that enables some development freedom, get rid of some of this red tape, and make it easier to build something that people can actually afford to buy or rent. But then smart people then go back to their city, like La Cañada, I'll call it out, La Cañada, Flint Ridge, Pasadena. I'm sure there's some Bay Area towns that are that way too, who go, I just realized if we apply this rule to our city, it's going to change our city. So therefore, we're going to go back to Sacramento and oppose it. And they do. And so there was a great law that was something like within a quarter mile of a transit station or something. Well, it applied to La Cañada, so I'm trying to remember what it was. But there was some law that maybe it was by right you could do a 2-for-1 split on all residential properties. So you could knock down a single family house and build 2 houses on the lot by right. I think that's what it was. And the governor pushed it really hard, and it had a lot of support on a state level from the state assembly. And then somebody in La Cañada, Flint Ridge goes, well, that'll affect my rich neighborhood up in the hills in La Cañada. So if you're following along on Google Maps, La Cañada is La Canada. So La Cañada sounds classier. The guy sat on some committee, and it was like the bill, they have to write on the bill how much money it'll impact the state budget. And because it's a policy change, it doesn't affect the state budget, but technically it does. So they put something like it'll affect the state budget by like $10,000 or something. And so because he was on some budget committee, he goes, well, that's too big of an impact, and killed it in committee, and then the bill never came back. And then since then, the governor had a recall thing that happened, which was complicated and involved COVID, and wasn't successful. But I think the recall scared him. So a lot of these housing bills never came back because he got scared by the recall. So he stalled out, So maybe the next governor will be bigger on trying to cut the red tape on housing. And in the meantime, nobody has anywhere to live. So, okay, let's walk the street here, and I'll read some of your chats as we go here. Let's see. Paul again writes, catch your breath, rest, take some time, and catch up on the chat and super chat. Will do. So let's find something good here. You guys are talking about Florida. Coliseum BART should be its own city core. So I rode BART today, as I was mentioning at the top of the stream here. And the Coliseum area is really quite sad. There aren't many, most of the places in California, if you watch the news. Okay, so we got a problem. T-Mobile, the more I walk toward where we were heading, T-Mobile cuts out. Now, I would switch from T-Mobile to a better company, except I'm the family admin on like 10 lines, and so I can't. So I will, I'll start walking this way again, and if it glitches out, then... So let's see how far we get before it glitches out. But anyway, as I was saying, there's some interesting problems that the city faces, but a lot of it, Oakland is the only place I've been in California where I go, you can't overhype the problems. Oakland has legitimate issues, and like you say, the area around the Coliseum should be a great city center, but it's not. The area around the Coliseum is scary. Like, I'm a 6-foot tall dude who shouldn't be scared, and I'm scared of that area, you know. So okay, so this is the top of the less touristy Lombard Street. So if you ever wanted to have some time where you could walk around and really enjoy Lombard Street, but don't want to deal with all the tourists who are packing it, driving their cars down, or taking selfies or whatever, this is a place where you can spend a little time on it yourself. So this gentleman's driving his Prius down the hill here. And city engineers 20 years ago talked with Fuel House, California's Gold, and figured out the radii of each of these turns is not quite as tight as Lombard Street. So technically Lombard Street is tighter than this, but Lombard Street comes away at more of an angle. You come in at an angle and leave more at an angle. And if you take a step back, you kind of see from here, it really kind of turns almost 90 degrees. So it's a very, so even though the radii of the circle is, the radii is not quite as tight, because of where it ends, you end up with more turns. And so technically, is this street more crooked than Lombard Street? And the answer is, well, you're kind of splitting hairs. They're both incredibly crooked streets. And so, you know, and I have to remember, they didn't put, developers back in the 1920s didn't put these in. They did it up and down the street without it choking down, dogging down, when it's so incredibly tight. And freeway here, but had the freeway gone straight instead of curved. So if you're following along on map app, look for Vermont Street, right next to the 101 freeway, at about, and you'll see. Okay, come on, T-Mobile. So you look down here, and you got, oh shoot. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I'm not real impressed with the quality of T-Mobile. John Doe, right? You'd think a city like San Francisco would have better cellular reception. Well, then let me just say this live stream is not sponsored by T-Mobile. T-Mobile, we bought Sprint and then became as bad as Sprint. So I used to have Sprint and I hated it. So I switched to T-Mobile, and I've loved T-Mobile. And then they bought Sprint, and they put all the Sprint towers in their network, and I've had nothing but trouble ever since. So Jorge writes, the richer the city, the worse the phone reception. Nobody wants ugly towers in their neighborhood. They're pretty good at hiding them, though. I've seen palm trees that are cell towers. You know, they're not really palm trees, but Face Pump writes, I have better reception in the Ozarks, where it's just hills and a big valley full of iron. Yeah, when I lived in Salt Lake City, T-Mobile had the best coverage, and so that's, between that and price, is why I picked it and built out a huge family plan. And then I moved, and everybody else is living in areas where T-Mobile works great. My sister lives in the Ozarks. Cell service is good. family in Salt Lake City. They have good service. I live in Southern California, and it drops out 5 times a day. I don't have coverage in my house. Like, it's really bad. And so, but it doesn't, I don't know. There's a lot of hills in California, and so that's part of the problem. And as you mentioned, it may be difficult to get some of the cell towers in. So, but for the moment, let's see, get caught up on the. Paul writes as a super chat. Thank you, Paul. I think you mentioned before, but I could help you set up a mobile streaming system. Yeah, one of the challenges, and that's been really kind of you to offer. One of the challenges is sometimes live streams like this one today happen kind of impromptu, where I happen to be filming in the city. I go, oh, I got done with the thing I'm working on. I have time. Let's do this. And to build out what you talk about would work phenomenally. I mean, there's a lot of neat things I could think of that I could do. Like, could I tie it into live video of a drone or something and give you guys a live drone shot or something, which would be really cool. But I'd have to build out. So right now I'm carrying a backpack with all my camera equipment so it doesn't get stolen. So that and that stuff I shot earlier today. And so I'm trying to think, well, if I had a live stream kit, can I carry 2 backpacks? I have to remember to bring it with me so that I have it. And so I think part of it is concern about the weight, space, cost if it gets stolen. But it's a neat idea that I haven't ruled out, and I appreciate you suggesting it. For the moment, I do appreciate that I can grab the cell phone and a little battery pack when it works. As you can see, I still haven't figured out a good headset mic yet. So, taking a look across the freeway here, you can see it's interesting. You always hear about in New York, Carnegie Hall and things named after wealthy people from long ago. And Zuckerberg bought the naming rights to that hospital. And so the big general hospital there across the freeway is, I think, the Zuckerberg Hospital, Facebook guy. So that's very strange to live in a time where we're kind of back to the Gilded Era, where people have so much money that they're buying, they become household names and they're buying naming rights to buildings like they did a century ago. And the question is, was it enough money that will there be people 100 years from now who will talk about the Zuckerberg Hospital in the same way we talk about Carnegie Hall in New York? I don't know, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. John Doe writes oligarchy. Well, I'll leave that to you to decide. I've got my own opinions, but I don't want to go there. Joshua Trades writes, I lived in SoCal for 4 years, and the only signal I ever got was outside. That's about right. I remember in the old days people making fun of AT&T as being really bad. Oh, hey, how's it going?
Mr. Rob, right?
Yeah.
That's you?
What's your name?
Nick.
Nick, what brings you by?
I just saw you in the neighborhood. I have a confession to make.
Yes.
You're in San Francisco for the second time, right?
Well, I've come here
yeah,
before, but second time for a live stream,
right?
yeah.
I was actually in your first live stream a long time ago.
Over by the bushes up on the hill?
Yeah.
Oh, it's good to see you again. What's changed in life since then?
Yeah. I've definitely done a lot more of my schooling since then. And
now, were you the one I was talking to who went to going to up to Utah, or is that somebody else?
I actually planned on doing that, but I decided to just finish it out at SF State.
Well, weather-wise, that was a good call.
Definitely.
So,
that's correct. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, step toward me just a little bit, because for the hill, I can hold it better.
No problem.
So you end up doing SF State. What'd you study?
Urban planning.
Urban planning?
Yeah.
That's cool. Internships or anything? What you up to?
No, I definitely working at Apple. I'm just trying to work on sales, business development, stuff like that.
The siren song of tech sales called you.
Exactly. I saw the urban planning salary. I was like, hey, pay the dividends I was looking for.
Well, I took some urban planning classes, and one of the things that scared me was hearing my professors talk about how they're out of college with their bachelor's in urban planning was code enforcement.
Oh yeah.
So they got to go around. I think back then it was
traffic enforcement or meter maid?
No, code enforcement. Like you built something on your house and it's too tall, so I got to come and give you a notice that your building is not up to code, and you have to fix it by tearing it down or whatever. And so you're almost like a urban planning cop, and everybody hates you because nobody likes the code enforcement guy who comes and says, sorry, you're only allowed 5 unlicensed vehicles on your property and you have 6. And so when I heard that was the pathway to becoming a planner in the city was code enforcement, I'm like, I don't want to be a code enforcement guy. I want people to like me.
How do you think that works in actually San Francisco? Because you have like as you know, San Francisco has very stringent rules, right, about what you can build, how you can do things, everything, right? So code enforcement seems like it'd be contrary there, right? So like if someone is doing something that's wrong, you could be or building something. Does that play into San Francisco like specialty or?
Well, that's so every city has different building codes, and so you have safety codes that have to do with like commercial business, how many people can be in the building, right? The fire marshal coming out and saying, hey, you got too many people in here. Or the other ones that come out and they'll put the notes in the building that say occupancy 96 people. You have building codes in terms of safety when you build the building. So that's coming out and saying, hey, the lumber studs have to be 16 inches apart. Yours are 18 inches apart. Fix that. So you have to do a framing inspection, a wire inspection. California, you even have to do an efficiency inspection where they pump the building with pressure.
Like seismic or something?
No, with air pressure to make sure that it doesn't have leaks, so that you're not leaking the air conditioning air outside, because that would waste energy. They call that a HERS test, H-E-R-S. I don't know what it stands for. So you have all that going into, and then of course zoning, which is the hardest part of like, okay, I'm going to tear my house down and build a new house. What am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do? Right. And and then that gets into years of planning and public meetings and lawsuits and attorneys. The bigger the city and the more people with their fingers in the pie, the more complicated it gets, right? And this is probably, I would venture to say San Francisco is probably one of the most difficult cities to build in, because it's so dense. There's a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and some of them have money. And
atmosphere, just very densely, it's kind of already built out, not a lot of land left.
Yeah, and so if I want to come in and do something really, people are going to have feelings about that, and some of those feelings are angry, and some of those angry people may have money for attorneys, and then and then you get into code enforcement in terms of, okay, I was allowed to do this thing to my building, but I didn't really follow the rules. I was allowed to add 10 feet to my house, but I added 12. Then they come out and they check it and they give you a ticket and tell you to tear it down and fix it. Those are the people in the suburbs, especially, where they'll have a porch and then they'll kind of close in the porch, and then they'll close in the porch a little more and a little more until eventually it's as siding and it's a room, and the code enforcement people could come out, make an issue about that. And then the last is how you use the property. So for instance, if I take my yard and fill it 6 feet high with trash, neighbors are going to complain about that. There are ordinances against that. And so the code enforcement's coming out.
Visual ordinances, I think, in San Francisco too, right?
Oh, really?
Just based off the aesthetics, I didn't dive too deep into that, but yeah, San Francisco's pretty particular. Actually, I heard you talking a little bit earlier on the live stream about Oakland and your experience over there. It's interesting because you're probably not wrong. It's a very interesting city going through some issues right now. But nevertheless, I have noticed, because I actually moved out there for just about 6 months or so before I moved back into the city. And when I was in West Oakland, if you're familiar with the area at all.
Is that over by Lake Merritt?
Not quite. It's actually on the other side downtown, between the bridge. So last stop before you start going on Bucket.
Where the freeway collapsed in 1989.
Actually, it's right there. Exactly. Mandala Park, used to bike down the Mandala Parkway, so to BART. So I lived over there for a couple of months, and I have noticed that Oakland, despite its issues and everything, something interesting about it is maybe because it is not, doesn't have the best image representation right now. They're building a lot there. I mean, there's a fair amount of transit-oriented development by MacArthur Station and downtown Oakland, and I just wonder if, they're building more than even, anywhere in Redwood City or San Francisco, definitely more than Marin County. But it's one of the, I definitely know why to some degree, but it's kind of affordable by Bay Area standards, and I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that they're building these crazy tall modern apartments in downtown that you just don't really see in San Francisco. I wonder if you know anything about that or had any opinions on it. But
well, I'm not real knowledgeable about Oakland other than when I've gone into Oakland.
Right.
So one of them is the Hagenberger Road is the road to the airport.
Right.
And famously, it made national news because some people from out of town stopped to get gas in their rental car and got not just burgled, but robbed at gunpoint,
right.
broad daylight, and the robbers casually took the guy's luggage and everything out of the rental car in broad daylight. I think stole the car and everything.
Right.
And nobody did anything. And because of that, and the people who were robbed, their family had some money. They were from out of state, Atlanta or somewhere. So they bought billboards and put them up and said, basically, we had $10,000 reward for anything about catching the guys who robbed us just because we're pissed off. Nobody got hurt, but
I didn't hear that.
they were mad. And so I noticed that there were headlines after that. Denny's and a bunch of other restaurants on that Hagenberger corridor closed. And it's partly because their customers' cars were getting broken into, and I don't think anybody was getting hurt per se, but it just was not a place that people were wanting to patronize anymore.
Right.
If you're going to the airport on BART, you're not stopping at those restaurants anyway. You're flying through the sky.
Yeah.
And if you're in a car, well, you watch that national news. When I drove down Hagenberger to check it out, I didn't stop for gas, right? But what really caught my attention and why I checked it out in the first place as somebody who loves In-N-Out Burger is it was the first time ever that In-N-Out Burger mothballed a location indefinitely. Not because they were replacing it with a new location nearby like they've done in Southern California a number of times, but because the location was actually performing well. It just, they were tired of customers getting their cars broken into, and they're like, look, if Oakland PD aren't going to do anything about it, we're done. Right. Now, In-N-Out didn't demolish the building. They didn't sell the building. In fact, they fenced it off, and they had a 24-hour armed security guy, or not armed, but a 24-hour paid security guy parked in his car, making sure nobody was messing with the property.
Interesting.
But that's what took me down there in the first place. But as I drove around, Oakland PD were making a presence. They were parked on the street. So it's not that Oakland are a bunch of lunatics who don't care about their own city. I think it's a city that actually is in a financial doom loop at the moment. But if there's a lot of development going in over by the bridge, well, that helps bring resources. I think there's a lot of really out of control trash, shanty towns of people building
the
RVs on the street that, and that's not, and that's the hard part is that's not Oakland's problem. More, I guess Oakland has some homegrown homelessness that they need to deal with. But as other cities, now that the Supreme Court has ruled that cities can kind of sweep people and say, go somewhere else, well, the people who are mentally ill and unhoused, well, they're going to go to the cities that have the least ability to do enforcement. There's always going to be a bell curve, and Oakland is at the bottom of the bell curve of having the resources to deal with it, to house people, to put them into treatment, or even to just sweep them along and just tell them to go somewhere else, which is kind of a failed policy because you can't just, it's like trying to clean your house by just sweeping it from one room to the next, and you just never, you never address the underlying issue, which is these people need to go into some kind of mental treatment center. They've got drug issues, they have schizophrenia, they've got...
Do you think maybe it's kind of a regional problem? Because you lived in Portland for a while, right?
I did.
And, there's always YouTube channels and everything like that, like City Beautiful, I'm sure.
Right.
And he had this video talking about the closest government to a regional government in the United States.
Metro.
Would be Portland, or in the metropolitan area, right? Would be Portland. And because each city is basically in county even, and BART and transportation runs across those lines, each county is literally fighting for resources. Like, hey, put your homeless over here.
Right.
And Oakland's like, hey, go somewhere else. Go to the Coliseum area specifically. Do you think there's a reason, because there's not a lot of interoperability, as you see that with transit and stuff like that, that's a very physical form of it. Do you think that the lack of a regional government might be part of it, or do you think it's just the Bay Area? The climate, right? The weather.
Well, California gets so complicated anyway, right?
Right. Oh,
so I'm from Utah originally.
Right.
So Utah only has 3 million people. So when they go to do transportation planning, sure, they do it city by city, county by county, but at the end of the day, it kind of all ends up in the legislature's lap to fund it. And so they can put together, in Utah, oh, they were so proud of this. We say, we're the only state in the nation that has a unified transportation plan for the entire state. But as I've lived in California longer, I go, okay, well, that's great. But there was only 3.5 million people. And so, and most of the people, Utah's very, not dense like San Francisco, but dense in the sense that because of water, like Las Vegas is dense in the sense that because of water, you don't have a lot of exurban sprawl where people live on 30-acre lots like they would in rural Atlanta, right? Like you get outside of Atlanta to rural Georgia, and you never are totally out in the country because there's always houses.
A little town or something. Utah's got like Salt Lake and then nothing.
Nothing, yeah. Right. And even when you do go to small towns, it's pretty clustered together because that's where the water is. Nevada's the same way. I think a lot of Idaho's that way. Wyoming, parts of Colorado, you know. And so it's easy to put a transportation plan together, and like 90% of the state all live in the same corridor, and you can, okay, we're going to build one transit system and one freeway system and one. But like I'm noticing with the map of BART today, my first experience riding BART kind of peters out the closer to San Jose you get. Yeah. I thought that you could do a loop on the thing. I thought, I bet you can get on a BART train. And I rode this nice thing from the East Bay, you know, from the inland areas on the other side of the hill. Right. And I swooped all the way in one seat ride. It swooped all the way around, dropped me off in this part of town. It's great. And I thought, you know, I wonder if maybe tomorrow when I'm filming, I'll take it the other way and come up the peninsula the other way. You can't, because San Jose does their own thing. BART ends at just past SFO. It doesn't keep going. And I go, what a shame. Like, you know, that they can't build one big unified system, but that's just kind of the California approach. And so going back to what you're talking about, regional planning like Portland, well, Portland took it to a whole new level where a lot of the, maybe not quite the zoning, but definitely really aggressive in a lot of their planning on a regional level. But they're a lot like Utah in the same sense. What's Oregon? 3.5, 4 million people. Yeah, they do have more towns than just the one, but like probably 75% of the state or so live in the Portland metro region. And they have a few unified raison d'etres, like the thing that glues Portland together. One, we don't want to be California, right? And so California, everything's divided and there's sprawl everywhere, you know. They don't want that. And two, they have some of the most fertile farmland in the world.
Surprising. I think you're the Central Valley of California, but yeah.
The Central Valley is an amazing machine for growing, but they don't have the water. You have to do a lot of work. Where Portland, there's a lot of natural rain, and so you can't grow a lot of the yummy things like avocados and stuff that you can. Definitely, the Central Valley has the yummier foods. Oh, yeah. But you can grow some amazing things. You know, berries especially grow like crazy in the Willamette Valley.
Like kind of temperate stuff, right?
Yeah, stuff that can handle the cold or rainy, wet climate up there. Yeah. And I think a lot of why it's so fertile is think about all the volcanoes that are in that region. And so I think that over, you know, many eons added, I don't know if that's the right term, eons, but more than millennia, right? But over a long period of time, millions of years, that added a lot of nutrients to the soil. Yeah. And so when I first heard about Portland having one unified plan for zoning, and then they go even farther. They draw a line around the city. And they say, this is the boundary. You go outside this boundary, you need like 25 or 40 acres per house to build outside of it. Basically, you're building a farmhouse if you go outside the growth boundary. And so they're trying to lock everybody into this and then build up and then expand the urban growth boundary bit by bit. There was a big controversy just in October where out by Intel in the western part, the Hillsborough area of Portland, the Metro Council and the governor and others signed a thing to open up the urban growth boundary to more development. And a lot of that is because they anticipate more onshoring of chip production and anticipating Intel hiring and companies subsidy, you know. So it's not to say Portland doesn't continue to sprawl out, but they try to do it in a controlled way with an urban growth boundary. Yeah. And as somebody who believes in affordable housing and kind of, I'm soft on sprawl. I don't actually mind sprawl if sprawl produces affordable housing units. But when I first heard about the urban growth boundary 20 years ago, I was horrified until somebody pointed out, this is some of the most fertile farmland in the world. And I go, okay, then that's worth saving. You go out
Yeah.
to Utah, they grow alfalfa. You know,
For like
it's
1 month
not.
of the year, right? 'Cause it
Yeah,
snows.
well, Utah, you probably get a grow season of 4 or 5 months. Like
I went to Herbert City one time, and they told me like, yeah, there's not too much. You get like a couple months, but
yeah,
like the valley, you know?
Memorial Day to Labor Day
Right. Yeah.
is
Decent, yeah.
and you get decent weather outside of that. You can start having decent days like in March, but the problem is you can at any time have a hard freeze at night.
Right.
And so versus Memorial Day to Labor Day, it's very unlikely that you're going to have snow or anything cold. Where I've seen snow as late as May, you know,
Right, yeah.
but it's a fluke. It doesn't normally do that, you know. Where
somewhat predictable, right?
Right, where California, sometimes you get some crops, you get 2 grow seasons out of it because you never get the hard freeze.
Right.
And so it's pretty amazing. So I don't know what Oakland's going to do, but I think innovate. What's the saying? Necessity is the mother of innovation.
Yeah.
And it's opportunity, but I know
City, but yeah, it's scary.
Any city that's so desperate financially that they sold the Coliseum to pay for 1 year of a budget deficit.
Nice.
So they own this stadium. They sold it for 1 year. That's not sustainable. Yeah, and I think they know it's not sustainable. But what are you going to do?
Right.
All the sports teams left. They moved to Las Vegas. They can pawn off all the liability of maintaining that property onto somebody else because it's probably not likely they're going to woo back some big sports teams to start making money again.
Anytime soon, that's for sure.
You know, I think maybe what I would have done if I were the city, and I don't know what deal they put together, is save the parking lots and save the flat areas and redevelop those, make some money. But
there's a lot of parking by the Coliseum. I mean, yeah, the area is a little rough, but if you go to the Coliseum is just a massive area.
Right.
It's like right for redevelopment, and a lot of BART stations are like that. It's weird. The only ones that they've had success at is like MacArthur Station, that big little tower next to it. But that's the one in the middle of the freeway. And I'm like, if there's one station I don't want to live near, it'd be the one near the freeway, right? I mean, I'd like to live near the one a little off, a little quieter.
Well,
a little nicer. Coliseum, by physicality, but in the area-wise, they haven't done anything.
Right. And the other is the type of development where you can go 5 stories of wood frame on top of a concrete story, a 5 over. If you could keep it wood frame, that really keeps the cost down.
Yeah.
As soon as you go to 6 plus, you have to build it out of steel. And then that makes the building very expensive. I think somebody told me it's almost twice as much per square foot. And so it makes the apartments very expensive to rent out. And so that's the other is, do you wait? Like I imagine a transit agency being like, okay, we have a park and ride lot near the stadium that we could build a parking garage and redevelop the flat parking lot. But you only get one shot at it. And if you allow people to come in and do 5-story stuff, you might regret it 20 years from now because maybe your transit-oriented development that's only 5 stories tall by the BART station is really not enough. You should have done 25 stories, but right now you can't justify 25 stories, but maybe 15 years from now you can.
Right.
So do you just leave it as a parking lot and hope the market gets better later, but then you have the opportunity cost of, well, that was 10, 20 years people could have been living in 5-story units, and so I don't know. I get caught up on some chats. You're welcome to stick around, but I also want to make sure we talk about other things too here. B right, Central California used to be an inland sea. The Sierra Nevada's water is why it's so fertile. Oh, that's interesting. I know that up until what was it? I think in the 1930s or 40s, there used to be Lake Tulare near Bakersfield, and there was actually a big lake, but the way the farmers drank all the water to grow us yummy food, Lake Tulare is gone. And when I lived in Bakersfield, the Kern River that comes down, the locals would joke, they'd call it the Killer Kern because people would drown in it. But I never saw any water in it ever. I always laughed the Killer Kern because it was like rivers you see in the Santa Ana River wash in Los Angeles, where it's just sand. It's just a big flat area with no water. And and there was a court ruling about a year and a half ago where the judge ruled that the farmers can't drink all the water. Some of it has to stay. And so it's kind of neat. The Kern River, still not a killer when you get down to Bakersfield, but it actually has some water in it. It actually looks pretty cool. So.
I would take off, man. But,
yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again, man.
Well, I'm sorry you didn't go to the University of Utah, but good on you for being
I'm here now, and I'm excited, man.
So. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah,
take care. Let's flip around and get a different view here, so that way you're not seeing the same spot over and over here, and get caught up on some of what you've been saying. It's to see. He, I think, was one of the first people to ever visit and you know me, I'm always happy to chat with you. Stop by. I think it's neat. You know, it's sad people call it stream sniping or whatever, but it's like, I think that's a little sad because I think that's fun. Like, you know, in radio they call that a live remote, where you do it when you do a live broadcast from like a tire store, right? And so the theory is the tire store pays your disc jockeys or your talk show hosts to come on out to this tire store, and it's like a commercial, and they get so many spots an hour where you let the manager come on and be like, oh, it's so great of you to be out here today, and you come on down, and the next half hour we'll knock $25 off the mounting and balancing just for coming by. Just mention, you know, classic country K-Fox or whatever, and then the disc jockey's down there too. And so when they come out of the songs or the talk show host or whatever, they'll come in and out. They'll say, you know, yeah, it's the movie show broadcasting live from Burt Brothers Tires or whatever. And so the station makes money for the ad, and listeners have fun because they come out, meet the talk hosts, have a great time, feel like they're involved in the radio station because they're fans, you know. So live streams are kind of like that, except I'm not sponsored by a tire store. Evidently, I'm sponsored today by Paul Rohrbaugh. Well, I appreciate your super chats. I saw another one here. I'll read it here in just a second. But the fun part of a live broadcast is not only does it help out the advertiser, try to get customers into the store, get the station its promotion because you have your little booth set up and listeners getting really engaged and they come on out. That's what I think a live stream can and should be. That's the industry I came out of. And so the idea of you in the neighborhood want to stop by, say hi, come on in, you know. So maybe it'll change if one day 10 people show up. Actually, Chicago, that kind of happened, and that was actually a lot of fun. If you ever watched the Chicago live stream, where like 6 people showed up, and then we were like a gang. We just walked all around Chicago, and I remember there was a tax accountant, I think, and he grew up in Chicago, so he knew the history of like the elevated train and things I didn't know. So, and it looked like the super chat from. Oh, we have some also not from Paul. So, oh, we got a number of them from Paul. So Paul writes, everything needed can fit. Oh, talking about building a live remote broadcast backup. He says, everything needed can fit into a fanny pack or small backpack. It's about redundant data streams across multiple carriers, so lost data doesn't matter. Yeah, and there's a lot of neat technology that I think I do need to look into at some point, you know, that's good to know. Paul also writes, when we were talking a moment ago about code enforcement, he said, so I hate code enforcement. I bought a handicapped van for my grandparents. It's 20 feet long, and it turns out you can't have vans longer than 19 feet in the city. So I don't know which state you're in, Paul, but I think you've told me before, and I forget. I suspect, like here in California, you go down to the DMV and start waving around, or you go to the city and start waving around something, paper that says Handicapped, and they'll let you. I think in California you can have a tinted windshield if you start waving around Handicapped. So I don't know. I would go that route. It probably depends on your state and the way the laws are written. Although ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, probably gives you enormous power nationally. So, like I say, you know, it's one thing if it was you bought a F-350 pickup and code enforcement came and said, sorry, you can't have a vehicle that long, and I think you'd probably be out of luck. But if it's a handicapped van and your grandparents have a handicapped tag, license plate or hanging tag, and that van is a ramp van, like, I think you'd have some mileage there going down the ADA route. So something to think about. B, hey, with a double-digit super chat. Thank you, B. Said, last time I asked you what your least favorite freeway is. What's your favorite freeway? Oh gosh. Probably one in Southern California because, well, for sentimental reasons, Interstate 15. Interstate 15 runs through the Inland Empire of LA, where I live. It runs through Salt Lake City, where I grew up. It runs through Las Vegas, that has become kind of like a little hometown, second hometown to me, just because I pass through it all the time, and I have some relatives that live there. And all three of those places have a 215 freeway. That's a 3-digit interstate. Las Vegas and Salt Lake City have 3/4 belts of the same shape, where the northeast section is missing. I find that absolutely fascinating that both Salt Lake City, if you want to look on the map, you'll see Salt Lake City and Las Vegas have a 215 that starts at the north end, runs counterclockwise 3/4 of the way around, and stops. So anyway, I find that funny, and both of them because the downtown area is in the northeast corner, and they didn't want to run it through the downtown, I guess. And then the Inland Empire, the 215 was the old highway, the old 395, US 395, and they got money to build a better freeway, so they did. And they called the new freeway the 15 and then renumbered the other one to be 215. So, 395? No, it was US 91. I think it was both 395 and US 91. But anyway, that's going back to like old 1950s, 60s numbers. So kind of a fun thing about LA freeways is some of the state highway ones were the old US highways, and they got something going on with the cop down there. Let's go check that out. Yeah, he's leaving. Let's see if I can see. He's talking. One of the things that California Highway Patrol do that I wish other agencies did is they'll talk to you on a megaphone. So if there's something they want to do. Every time I stay at a hotel by a freeway, I'll hear him in the middle of the night. Driver of the white sedan, make a right turn, then proceed to the gas station and pull in. And it's because they don't want to write the ticket on the side of the freeway. They'd much rather write the ticket somewhere where they feel safe. So they'll just start barking at you on the because you might have noticed, if you like YouTube, I'm a sucker for those videos that PR departments for police departments and highway patrol agencies and stuff are trying to get some good press by kind of almost doing the show Cops, but but they're actually responsible and blur people's faces out, which is good. Don't get me started on Cops not blurring people's faces of the TV show. And one of the most famous one is Pinal County, Arizona, where they have Fridays with Frank, and it's Officer Frank Slope or whatever his name is, I forget which, and he'll pull people over and show the interactions of pulling people over. And one of the challenges is people will stop sometimes like in the turn lane in the middle of the road, and he'll just let them pull over to the left. And I noticed CHP don't do that. CHP will definitely yell at you and tell you exactly where to go. And I kind of like that, because then the driver gets instructions rather than trying to just guess, But I've noticed Coral Gables, Florida, I believe, and Utah Highway Patrol are now also doing YouTube channels where they are showing their interactions with the driving public. And And I laugh at the Utah one because I know Utah culture, having grown up there, and how many of the interactions where somebody gets a ticket ends with the cop saying, yeah, I'm sorry, but I got to give you a ticket, but please slow down next time. But yeah, sorry to give you a ticket. Like, that's so Utah for the cop to. In fact, my last time I got pulled over by Utah Highway Patrol, the cop was really nice, gave me a warning. I exited the carpool lane somewhere I wasn't supposed to, and I do know better, but I kind of played stupid, and the cop was nice and let me off. And he was too nice. He said, by the way, I clocked you at 80 miles an hour. And I said, yeah, I know, I was going a little fast. He says, I'm okay with that, but just don't go any faster. And as he walked back to his car, I got very professional, very friendly highway patrol trooper. But I'm going, this guy's like too nice. You know, I guarantee CHP wouldn't have talked to me like that. And I would have. CHP, I feel like you're getting a ticket. First of all, you're probably doing like 94. And second of all, oh, you're getting a ticket. Like, I've never heard of anybody getting pulled over by CHP and getting a warning. So, but yeah, so to answer your question, B, I'd probably say, what would be my favorite freeway? Like one I really like to drive. You know, I could start off by naming ones that are a lot of fun, and I'd see if I can kind of narrow down. So the 134 freeway through Glendale, and the Glendale freeway. So the Glendale freeway is pretty amazing because they never completed it. It was supposed to run through Hollywood out to Santa Monica, or at least run to the 101 freeway in Hollywood. And they never finished it. The 2 freeway just sort of dead ends in a neighborhood. And so that part's pretty bad. But because of that, it's not easy to get onto the 2 freeway. And so you can have the 101 and the 5 and everything just slammed. But you want to sneak out of there, you get on the 2 and take the 2 up to the 210. So the Glendale freeway, they built it nice and wide because they anticipated it being connecting to things. And it's marvelous because it doesn't go anywhere, and they never finished it. So that's a fun freeway. And then the ramp from the 134 freeway, which runs from Pasadena to Glendale, you take the 134 westbound to the southbound 2 onto the Glendale freeway. You go through a tunnel, and they bank it. So, and similarly in Pasadena, when you go, the 210 freeway was supposed to turn into the 710 freeway and go out to Long Beach. They never finished that. That's a video I want to do someday because it shows all of these cities that had poor people and areas where people were African American, and the planners of the 1950s called it blight and bulldozed their neighborhood to put the freeway through, and you couldn't stop it. And yet you go to Pasadena where there was a lot of rich people, and they stopped that freeway for 50 years until finally Metro's given up. They're selling the houses that they bought. Pasadena's planning to redevelop the freeway stud. Like the 710 freeway is dead. But they had this gigantic interchange that they built. So when you're going from the 210 west to the 210 west, you actually go through a tunnel on a ramp because the straight lines would have gone onto the 710 south. Following along on a map, this makes sense. If you're just listening to me, it sounds like I'm talking gibberish. It's like the SNL skit, the Californians, like, yeah, man. So like, I had to go to like my chiropractor, so I took the 134 all the way out. It's like, no way, man, it's freaking Long Beach. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. It's one of my favorite SNL sketches, is where the entire sketch is it's a soap opera, but all they do is yell freeway numbers at each other. It's like Andy Samberg in it. So if you're on the 210 freeway in Pasadena, so you're going southbound, but it's actually westbound. And to stay on the 210, you go in this tunnel, and it goes westbound into Pasadena, and the 134 turns into the 210. And coincidentally, my grandfather, when he was alive, when he was a kid, grew up on a little street parallel to the freeway, and long after he'd grown up and moved away, the state of California bought and bulldozed that house. So one of my favorite freeway ramps drives on property that used to be where my grandfather grew up. So, but that ramp in Pasadena is pitched that you can, in a Honda, do about 55 miles an hour and just blast it like you drop it down a gear to fourth gear and nail the gas in the tunnel. And even with like my little Honda engine, it just makes a nice as you kind of go through, and the lights are flashing by as you go by, and it's 2 lanes, and you know everybody gets in, I believe, the left lane because they're anticipating the merge, the big semi trucks and everything. So you get over in the right lane, nail it, and go 55 through the tunnel and just blow everybody's doors off because the lane's wide open, and then the lane's clear, and you just sail and you merge right in. And then at that point, because it's the 210 and 134 coming together, for that stretch of downtown Pasadena, you're down below grade, the city's above you, and the cross streets, I think it's about 10 lanes wide just on the eastbound side. And so I say westbound, it's 210 eastbound to 210 eastbound. Anyway, sorry if you're following on to that. So anyway, to answer your question, actually probably the 210. Like I love the 210 freeway. It's modern and you can zip along on it. And as long as you avoid rush hour, it's a heck of a lot better than this. Okay, Paul writes, I'm signing off from the East Coast. Love your roadway, gentleman Robert. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for a lot of super chats tonight. That's very kind of you. So, B writes again, I've learned so much with a super chat, by the way, and thanks again, B, for your double-digit super chat. You're right. I've learned so much from watching your videos. Thanks for all your hard work. Well, I appreciate it. You're welcome. I never tried my hand at getting in the CAD and doing the engineering. I always was working in media and thought I was entering this world of actually designing the stuff, until I realized that you have this multi-billion-dollar industry of transportation, and the professionals in this industry do such a poor job communicating it, not because they're bad communicators. On the contrary, civil engineers and transportation engineers in particular are very good at talking to their stakeholders, the city council members, to other agencies, to the public in public meetings. But the problem is they're so busy doing the job of the engineering that they don't have the time to get in and say, how do I apply broadcast techniques to this industry? And so it's a little market I carved out that you helped me carve out, because it turned a hobby into a job of being able to say, okay, how do we tell this engineering concept in the way that you tell it on the local news, except the local news gives you literally 90 seconds to cover a news story. We're going to take 10 minutes. And so by doing that and taking my past world with my education of intending to go back and be an engineer that got hijacked, that you hijacked me, I think we're able to do something really neat, because there's a lot of professionals in this industry who do really good work. And I think they deserve some credit to be able to have us point a camera at what they're doing, and we can take a look at what they're doing and see, and it gives ideas for other cities as well. Let's walk over to the, and I'll catch up with the live chat here too as I walk. But let's walk over a little more light, because I look like I'm a raccoon eyes with the how dark it is. It got dark so fast while I was chatting with Nick from Ithaca, writes Nerve 007, and Odds and Ends writes, Moda Center cap is going to be interesting. Yeah, I was filming in Portland. I don't have a freeway cap. So those of you who aren't familiar with Portland, river splits the city east and west between Washington and Oregon. Also on the Oregon side splits it east and west. And so the city of Portland has still a big river, but narrower river called the Willamette that runs north and south. I learned how to pronounce it because it's spelled Willamette, and I didn't know how to say it, so I kept calling it Willamette. And this very religious, churchy woman said, the way you remember it is it's Willamette, damn it. I go, oh, okay. Now I know it's called the Willamette River. And on the east side of the Willamette River is Interstate 5. And Portland isn't known for having gigantic freeways per se, but they do try to get them to at least 3 lanes. You know, and the problem is there's a couple of places in the Portland metro area where you get down like 2 lanes. And 2 lanes is just not enough lanes. And so that area by the Moda Center, which is where the Portland Trailblazers play basketball, the freeway goes down below grade and there's a lot of cross streets. The grid carries over. And so if you kind of look at it, you go, this would be sort of the perfect place to put a freeway cap over the top of it and have a big city park and just kind of make the freeway disappear. And so they did. And they haven't done it yet, but they've put that plan together. And I think the Oregon Department of Transportation is trying to do a win-win here, or kind of like a compromise of saying we really need to get that freeway from 2 lanes to 3. It's near the interchange with Interstate 84, and with the lanes dropping and things, there's an unnecessary traffic jam that happens there. And yes, you have the principle of induced demand of, yeah, you add another lane, more people will drive through it. Well, that's true. But I feel like myself, induced demand is something I start to get worried about on, say, the 91 freeway between Orange County and the Inland Empire, where you already have about 10 lanes going westbound and eastbound. So you have like a 20-lane freeway, and saying, well, maybe 2 more would help. Like going from 10 to 12, I don't know if it's all that helpful, because the underlying issue with the 10 lanes is they're jamming up in the first place. And if you get so much traffic on the freeway that the speed falls below 65 down to 30, you just cut that capacity in half. You might as well have 6 lanes at that point. And if you go from 30 to 15, now you have 3 lanes, right? So adding more lanes doesn't fix it if the speed drops. You got to keep the speed up. But you also have an issue of, if you only have 2 lanes, even if you can keep them going 65, that's still a 50% reduction from 3 lanes. And you might, and basically I think what Oregon's Department of Transportation are looking at is they're saying, look, if we can keep the jam window a little bit narrower by having that 3rd lane through there, that's going to benefit everybody. And it fits consistently with the rest of the region, which is 3 through lanes, through the whole area, 3 through traffic lanes on the 5 and the 205 and the 84 and 26, so that way it's consistent. And take these areas where you have 2 through lanes and make them 3. And one of those areas is right through central Portland, where a lot of people bike and walk. That was the northeast Portland, where I lived for 6 months to a year without a car. Didn't need it because it was so walkable. And so if Oregon DOT came in and said, we just want to widen the freeway there, that might be a tough sale. So I think what they did is said, well, what if we did both? What if we're going to widen the freeway a little bit, but you won't even have to see it, because we'll put a park on top of it. The thing's going to cost at least $1 billion to do. And when we're done, the motorists down on the freeway have something that functions a little bit better because it's 3 lanes. And up on top, you don't even have to see it, because you have this beautiful park and the freeway just vanishes. So I think it's kind of a win-win. A couple of challenges they've had is, one, they were trying to figure out how to pay for it, and played with the idea of saying, well, maybe we should just start charging tolls on I-5. That, I think, is a challenge. But the bigger one is that the concept of induced demand and never widening freeways really resonates with a lot of people in Oregon. And they're very noisy at making sure public officials and public comment hear about that. And you have the interstate bridge, the I-5 bridge going into Washington, where they're trying to do the impossible. In fact, video probably on that coming out in January, of everything they're trying to do to put a deal together that Washington and Oregon and motorists and bicyclists and everybody involved can live with. That would be a modest improvement for everybody. And then there's a clip, I've got it, of the Metro Council that run the the TriMet Council, excuse me, the mass transit people. And one of the council members for TriMet, she really got into it, and she said, hey, you say you're not widening the freeway, but you are widening the freeway because you're adding this auxiliary lane. And the head of the project, Greg Johnson, he said, well, it's an auxiliary lane, so it's when the freeway comes on, you have a lane that immediately drops off at the next exit. You see those where it says exit only, and it's the short stripes, And so he goes, it's not really a through lane. It's just to help give merge space so that people have between the two exits to figure out how to get the cars coming on the freeway to smoothly merge in and give time for the cars in the through lanes to merge out to take the next exit. And she goes, yeah, I know, but you do an aux lane to another aux lane to another aux lane, and next thing you know, it's a widening. And it's like, she's got a point, but like, that's the challenge with transportation is, if you get into your particular wheelhouse and only look at it from your point of view. So if you're a transportation engineer of the 1950s, you're only concerned on vehicle throughput. So you don't bother putting in sidewalks or bike lanes or anything. Well, that's bad. I also argue that a person can get so focused on the urban planning goals of trying to say freeway widenings are bad, that they miss out on little opportunities to do some small, adding an aux lane for 1 mile, so that the freeway flows better, so that you are pulling more of the traffic off city streets, which make the city streets safer for people because they're able to use the freeway because the freeway is in a parking lot. Almost as if there are some people who hate freeways and cars so much that they want the freeway to stay broken on purpose. But that's kind of counterintuitive. Like, if you have a good working freeway, then that gets the cars off the city streets. Like, that's a win, and it's good for economic activity because people are able to move around and spend money, but the freeway isn't everything. You're not gonna move all of San Francisco with the 101 freeway, but it doesn't mean that you intentionally want to make the 101 freeway either, right? So it's not balanced. So anyway, that's getting there on talking about the Moda Center, which is not here in San Francisco. That's actually in Portland. So we got Pete Martin with a very generous double-digit super chat. Well, thank you very much, Pete. And Pete writes, thoughts on aggressive driving trend that seemed to really ramp up and has persisted since COVID. I have a friend of mine who you always have, you have friends you meet in college, and they kind of become your friends that you just talk like deep philosophical questions with, So I had a buddy of mine, and he brought that up, and his theory gets very sociological. So he starts talking about the social contract and how we broke it, which is an interesting angle I hadn't considered. I'm gonna start walking, and Pete, I'll keep talking about your question as we walk here. So I guess one last look at the fake Lombard Street. Well, in fact, let me walk up it just so you can see it as we talk, and I'm sure I'll be out of breath, but I think it's fair you get to see it one time and try not to get run over. So we all have a social contract that we all follow because as humans, we want to get along with our fellow humans, and we know that if we follow the rules, we avoid consequences, and in turn, other people don't hurt us. And in COVID, we kind of broke it. I think we realized we put in a lot of very strict rules. And you're not seeing much of anything, are you? It's all black. So never mind, we won't walk up it. But hopefully you saw enough during the daytime. And you can always check out Vermont Street on Google Maps. There was a lot of protocols with wearing masks and social distancing and lockdowns and shutdowns and things. And I think we all began to realize that there was no way to enforce them. It was really all self-enforced. There was occasionally lightning strikes where you'd have, some business would get a big ticket and get shut down. governor of California got caught in a scandal for going out to lunch with his friend. He wasn't supposed to. But, I think the Speaker of the House had a haircut, but we realized, like, yeah, it was a stay-at-home order, but we realized there's still the same number of cops in our town, and nobody was going to pull you over and give you a ticket for being out doing something you weren't supposed to. And it kind of forced us all to become rule breakers in a way, because we're in a situation where the response the pandemic required wasn't necessarily proportional to what we could actually do. And so we all broke the rules. And some of that happens in driving anyway, like speeding. The social contract on speeding broke a long time ago, where most of the country, as long as you're being reasonable with your speeding, you're not going to get even pulled over. So school zone, sure, but everywhere else you can go 5, maybe even 10 over and get away with it, because there just isn't enough law enforcement to enforce all that, and there never will be. So then it really got weird at COVID, where I think a number of things happened. One was inevitably YouTube and police body cameras, cell phones and things have done a really good job of helping us really see what's been happening in law enforcement. And we find that it's human in nature, right? Like any of us, you think about drivers. 90% of drivers are good and 10% cause all the problems. And there's probably some similar ratio when it comes to police officers. 90-something% of them do a reasonably good, try to follow the rules and do a good job. And then you have some percent, and it depends on what city you live in, what experiences you'd had, and what your general take on your cynicism towards society is. But there's some figure you have in your head, somewhere between 0 and 50%. My number would probably be around like 6%. Police officers that shouldn't be police officers, and they're just rolling lawsuits for the city. And they're the ones who get on YouTube a lot. And 2020 was a year where a number of those officers, one in particular, really ticked off a lot of people. It was racial, it was disrespectful, it was wrongful death. It was a big mess. Ended up in a situation where public trust in law enforcement, respect for law enforcement, is low. That happens. Sometimes public agencies screw up and people lose respect for them. That happens to transit agencies, that happens to departments of transportation, it can happen to police departments too. And then you have cops who are going, no, wait a minute, that guy's speeding on an empty road and he can really speed because the road's wide open. But if I pull him over, he's going to give me COVID, and he's going to videotape it, and he's going to sue me, or he could shoot me, or whatever, or he's afraid I'm going to shoot him. I'll just forget it. I'll just let him speed. And so we broke the social contract with driving. Then the lockdown's end, everybody gets back on the road. But those really aggressive, I can get away with murder attitudes that we developed during the lockdown still exist. So we have a broken social contract, but we're back to full volume on the freeway. And so that's probably playing a role. And cops are not as eager to want to go enforce it because they go, it's not worth it. I don't want to deal with that guy. He'd probably start quoting weird maritime law stuff that doesn't exist, and then I'll end up on YouTube, and it's not worth it. Just let him get away with it. That could be. Maybe another part of it is stress. We go learn to finally chill out a little bit with work from home, and then the work from home ended, and some jerk boss really high up the food chain said you got to go back to the office, and now you're stuck on the 101 just trying to get home, and you realize you don't have to live this way, but a boss is making you have to live this way, and you can't yell at him because it's corporate and you're never going to see the corporate guy. So who do you have to take it out on? Well, that jerk who cut you off. So you get really aggressive and honk. Just walking over to the live stream today, I saw it was bad. It was guys honking at each other and then doing something very un-California, which was the guy would speed up, pull in front of the other guy on a city street, slam on his brakes. And I go, that's the kind of crap you see in the Midwest. You don't typically see that in California. And so I go, oh man, it was to the point everybody had their windows down, and like, without even meaning to, I just blurted out at the guy. I'm like, relax, man, relax. Like, what's the big stress, But it didn't help. They were still stressed out. Okay, let's start crossing back over here, and I'll stop taking a look at more of your chats here. So this is south of Portillo's Hot Dogs. Now, Protero Hill, I'm having trouble. There's an R in there that it's not Potero, it's Potrero Hill. So you can see the curve of the 101 freeway there to avoid the hill, which you can't see because you can kind of see it a little bit, I guess. And so if we went straight ahead and the freeway had just charged right through, that fake Lombard Street would be gone. So, okay, let's take a look and see what you've been writing and what you want to chat about next here. So first go to the super chats and see. So Pete Martin talking about aggressive driving. Yeah, the other thing too, real quick about the aggressive driving, a lot of the new cars have tons of horsepower, and I wonder how much that plays of, like, you start to feel like a god almost, because you've got just cheap horsepower and tons of it, and so you want to be able to just do whatever you want because you got 400 horsepower, where it's hard to, like, I drive, oh, pardon me, ma'am. Let me get that out of the sidewalk here. I'm going to try to get this at a different angle so we're not blocking the sidewalk. Now there isn't room. Shoot. I don't want to, well, we'll try it, and I'll try to be more cognizant of people wanting the sidewalk. So I drive a Honda Fit. I got 118 horsepower. It's really hard to be aggressive because they just look so dumb. Like, if I get angry and just want to, like, rev my gas and make a lot of noise and drive away, it's sort of like a mouse getting angry, like, squeak, squeak, squeak. It's just like, I don't know. It's not that. It's not I can't cash that check, versus if I drove a Dodge Demon and you get really mad, or even an F-150, you can make that V8 really sing as you get mad and drive off. So this is not a good place to stand, even though it's fun to look at the 101, but I'm blocking the sidewalk, so I got to go somewhere else where I'm not causing a problem. I don't know, like, every time I start to try to wrap my head around why we're all driving so aggressively, I don't know what to think. I do know that it definitely is something that happened during COVID, because people didn't used to drive so angrily. I kind of went the other way during COVID, and I learned to let things go, because I realized life is short. I know about 3 people who died of COVID. I didn't know them I knew one pretty well, but when you realize life is short, it's like, well, why make it any shorter getting in road rage? Well, that's not interesting either, because there's a freeway back there, but you can kind of see it. You see the lights. You can see the southbound 101 flying by and the northbound 101 not moving. We'll find somewhere more interesting to go, but we'll park here for a minute and get caught up on what you're saying. So, anyway, to answer your question, Pete, I don't know. I really don't know. But got, like I say, a couple of theories. All right, heading back to the live chat here, where you're talking about bad drivers in North Central Maryland writes, many agencies are extremely short-staffed right now. because like many other professions, people just don't want to be cops anymore. The police chief of Dallas, Texas, many years ago, there was a incident where, it was probably about a decade ago now, somebody, I think, shot some police officers, which is the fastest way to get cops to respond. I suppose it'd be like the DOT if you like damage the freeway, like that would get their attention, right? Now, so they shot some police officers, killed them. And then there was this big manhunt, and I think they cornered the guy in a parking structure. And they did something that ethically made me very uneasy, but it worked, which is they took a bomb diffusing robot, but put a bomb on it and then blew the guy up. So, which was weird, but it worked. But around that time, the police chief of Dallas made a good point about law enforcement. And he says, part of the problem is we got a lot of ills in society, but we don't properly address them as a society, as cities and counties and states. We just dump them all on the police. And the police department, police officers kind of become a catch-all for everything. And examples he has like, oh, a kid won't do his homework, so the mom calls the cops. There's a dog running loose in the neighborhood biting kids, so you call the cops. There's a suspicious-looking homeless guy who's talking funny, you call the cops. There's people living in an RV on the street, call the cops. And a lot of these are really like, you need to properly staff animal control, you need to probably create a whole city department to deal with homelessness, and a whole department to deal with mental health issues, societal ills about home life breaking up and kids. Like, I don't know how cities can even address that, but we dump it all on law enforcement. And so you end up with a profession where right now the profession is professionalizing again. And it takes time to restore people's trust in the profession. And so, in order for cops to do their job, people need to respect the cops. And in order for people to respect the cops have to be respectable. And some departments are respectable and others are still working on it. And so it's hard, especially the departments that lack professionality are probably especially really struggling to hire, because who wants to work for a department where everybody in the community doesn't trust you? And for low pay and terrible hours and having to work in the middle of the night and deal with all the problems of society, things that we should be many of these people we should be hiring psychologists and social workers and therapists to deal with, medical professionals to deal with, but so the cop has to do it, and do and in a situation where is this person that you're dealing with, does he have a knife and he's going to suddenly pull it out and you don't get to go home, And so then you get jumpy and you shoot the guy, and it turned out he didn't have a knife. You thought he had a knife and you shot him because you were trying to go home alive that night, and you misunderstood, and now there's people protesting outside your house and you're on leave and you're getting sued and you might go to prison for murder, and it's like everybody loses, and you're like, and how much does this job pay? And like $45,000 a year, and you're like, yeah, pass. So I can see that's difficult, And say, well, Rob, why are you wandering off talking about the cops? This is a transportation channel. That's true, but like that's the interesting thing about transportation is like transportation involves housing, transportation involves people, transportation involves public policy. Budgets pay for all these different things. Like it's all a big, rich tapestry, If everybody was mentally sound and had good employment and affordable housing, San Francisco would have a whole lot more money to spend on transportation projects. But they can't. They have to do cheap things, in transportation sometimes, because a lot of their budget has to go with dealing with people who are not mentally sound, who don't have housing, that have affordability issues, having to fight, instead of putting in efforts to try to fight to get grants from the federal government to do some type of transportation project, they're having to fight to get grants from the state or the federal government to help deal with social issues, because that's what a society is. It's dealing with all the other humans we share space with, So I don't know, there's a lot of complicated problems, and I wish it was as simple as like just prescribing to one ideology and being like, yeah, if we just do this one thing, it'll solve all of our problems. And it's like, well, but it never's that simple. It makes me nostalgic for the 1990s. I was a kid, and it was the end of history. Like in the 1990s, we defeated communism. Democracy was on the march. They balanced the budget. The president was having a good time in the Oval Office. No, that actually, people weren't real happy about that one. But like, it felt like there was nowhere to go but up. We'd solved all the problems, All my friends grew up in houses that their parents owned, A lot of them, their parents never went to college. They just bought a house, And it felt really good until like 9/11. And then that was that moment where we realized, oh, there still can be problems in the world. And now here we are 23 years later, almost 24 years later, and going, yeah, there are a lot of problems. Past generations worked really hard to build the world that we got to enjoy and do enjoy. And I realized, like, okay, I was driving through the Central Valley to come here, right? And through Fresno, there's the giant high-speed rail project. And I get looking at that thing and I go, that is so expensive and it costs so much money. And I don't know when I'm ever going to ride it. I'm going to be old by the time I ride it. Well, maybe if you go back and start looking at a lot of these highway projects that we built, we think of it as like, oh, well, old generations had it together and they got that thing built quick. Well, sometimes, but a lot of these highways were built out over 50 years, one at a time. We get to enjoy them all now because they're now all built, but like, I forget that, like, especially pre-interstate highway system, it was a lot of work to get a freeway type road built. They put out bonds on a state level and really cobble things together and work hard to do it. And even when the interstate system happened, it still took 40 years to build it out. And I could see somebody cynically looking at the highway system, the interstate highway system in around 1970, and it's going, man, we've been working on this thing for 15 years and we've only built half of it. What a boondoggle, Look at all the cost overruns, and it's costing us way more than we anticipated. And now here we are, the interstate system's been complete since the early 1990s, more or less. They're still adding to it, but like the original system is done. And because of decisions that people, the greatest generation and silent generation made, and baby boomers helped build, and we, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, we all get to enjoy this awesome freeway system because other generations built something that many of them never got to see completed. And so I got thinking about that. I go, the high-speed rail system has the potential to do some amazing things in California where you can tie all these transit systems to something. So theoretically, like, I could have traveled, I had somebody drop me off at San Bernardino, take Metrolink to the high-speed rail, take high-speed rail here, and then take BART to my hotel. I wouldn't have needed to take my old 350,000-mile car that keeps breaking down on filming trips. Which, by the way, after the last live stream, my car broke down twice since then. I could have taken a high-speed rail train instead. And that'd be good for climate change because I'm not putting hundreds of miles on the road. It's good for traffic because that's one fewer car. And, made good for me because I'm putting less wear and tear on my car. It allows interesting new development types because some of the more land-intensive, denser stuff can be near transit, and you actually can get places on transit. But boy, the cost overruns and the delays, and I could see critics are not wrong when they look at the high-speed rail project and go, is this thing ever going to get done? What a boondoggle, right? But if we're building it not necessarily just for us, but for future generations, there's going to be Gen Alpha, and I don't know what comes after that, Gen Beta, kids, when they're our age, when they're in adulthood, are going to love that high-speed rail train, and they're not going to care what it costs in the same way we don't care what the Golden Gate Bridge costs or the interstate highway system. You ever lose sleep at night going, boy, the federal government sure got screwed on the interstate highway system. Boy, that thing was like triple the budget of what they said it was going to be. We don't care. because the benefits to the interstate highway system far outweigh the cost overruns. And I have a suspicion, thinking long term, that the California high-speed rail is going to be the same thing. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic. So let's take a look here and see what else we're talking about here. So, first of all, check to see if there's any super chats from you that I'm missing. But the last one was from Pete, talking about aggressive driving. So we're caught up there. But I will keep an eye out if you have one that you'd like to add. You'll jump to the front of the line, and I'll catch up here with the regular chat, just start grabbing a few here. Christopher Taboni, the pissed off bus driver, says, no, it doesn't. Total waste of money, defund the high-speed rail. You're not wrong. That's what I say, that's what's so complicated about projects like these, is right now we're absorbing all the costs, the downsides of the high-speed rail project, the inconvenience of the construction that's torn apart Central Fresno for years, the bonds, and having to issue bond after bond, and it's really scary. And when you see the numbers, oh my gosh, the numbers on the high-speed rail project are just eye-watering, eye-popping. Like, where they're going, okay, we have an overrun of $10 billion. Like, an overrun of $10 billion? And so my attitude was much more on the fence about high-speed rail until I went to the Central Valley, started driving around and looking at this project. And I've realized that, I guess I had the impression, I listened to too much John and Ken show at KFI in LA, and they hate the high-speed rail show. But they were funny to listen to, because the whole shtick of John and Ken is, Ken's retired now, is Ken would like play devil's advocate, or he'd like set up the baseball of like, yeah, John, but did you know that it has a cost overrun of $10 billion? And then John would respond, $10 billion? What? I can't believe this. It was so great. And, if you listen to him, it sounds like we've just been dumping money in a bottomless pit, and it sure feels that way with the cost overruns. And basically nothing has gotten built. But if you go to the Central Valley now, I realized, I think in my head, I've been comparing the high-speed rail project to building a freeway, because that's the biggest project I've ever observed. You know, when you build a freeway, you probably spend, $2 to $5 billion. It runs for a dozen miles or so through outer suburbs. It has maybe a dozen or more interchanges, another dozen overcrossings. And you start looking at it and you go, but I guess it's a lot of money, but in the long run we'll get some benefit out of it. And then you build it and you open the freeway and it's fun. And so in my head, I'm thinking of high-speed rail as like, okay, we're building a freeway, so it should be like $5-10 billion tops. And it has, 20 overcrossings, and so, a dozen stations. And I don't know what I was comparing it to, because that's the same kind of money that you'd spend on like a light rail, $2 billion on like a light rail train that goes a dozen miles or whatever, right? Because all the bridges and everything you have to build. And so when you get these eye-popping numbers of high-speed rail, you think like, these people are idiots. How are they spending so much money? But then go to the Central Valley, like I did, and you start driving around. Like first of all, go to downtown Fresno. And you realize that for this high-speed train to work, you can't have it land way outside of town, because everybody who's going to be arriving on high-speed train doesn't have a car. 100% of the people getting off that train will not have a car. So the place to have that train land is downtown Fresno, right by the grid. Okay, we do that. We build light rail trains and things that go into cities, no problem. But the ballot prop measure in 2008 basically mandated certain requirements for time and speed that they're trying to hit. So it's genuine high-speed rail, so like they have in Europe. So this train's going like, pushing 200 miles an hour. So you can't have, as you come to the city streets in downtown Fresno, you can't suddenly just have it pop up. Like even light rail or even a freeway ramp, you can kind of have it over a city block or two, elevate, 10, 20 feet to cross over something. You do that on a high-speed train and the thing's going to be popping, and so you can't do that. So you have to start the ramp really early and gradually build it up. And again, to meet the requirements high-speed rail engineering require and what the ballot prop require. And so to do that, when you get to Central Fresno, it's up on a bridge. So to carry the high-speed train through Fresno, the engineers and planners elected to say, we're going to build a gigantic viaduct, probably the biggest one west of the Mississippi. And this train's going to be up on piers for miles. But what that does is it allows it to cross all the city streets, because you can't be going up and down and up and down. And as you get to a downtown grid, the streets are too close together. I guess they could have done a big trench and put it underneath, but I suspect that might have cost even more, because then you're moving pipes. So they put it up high. So when you go to Fresno, and they've already built this thing, it's done. This viaduct through Fresno. It's amazing. It's phenomenal engineering, unlike anything I've ever seen. It just happens to, instead of having a deck on top to drive a car, it's got train tracks. Fantastic. They did a great job. And so you get looking at that, and of course that thing is an eye-popping number itself. I think it was in the many, 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 many billions of dollars itself, simply because they were building a building strong enough to hold high-speed rail trains and elevate them over basically the entire city of Fresno. It's remarkable. So then you go out to the countryside, you go, okay, well, here's where it gets cheaper because it's flat. And so I'm thinking like Union Pacific, like the old 1800s railroad, where you buy up some farm field and you lay the track, and every once in a while you put a railroad crossing with signs warning of the train, and you're good and you're done. But those are trains that are limited to 79 miles an hour. And again, that's old 1800s technology. You know, if Union Pacific and Southern Pacific don't build new train tracks really much anymore. But if they did, they wouldn't build them to these old 1800 standards. They wouldn't have just that white X sign just saying, watch out for trains. Like, you'd actually have arm gates and really like control where you allow crossing. And that's for trains going under 79 miles an hour. This train's going so fast, if a car got in the way, not only would the car just explode, right, into a million pieces because the train's going 200 miles an hour or whatever, you've a good chance you'd derail the train and kill everybody on the train. So what do you do when you go through an entire Central Valley for hundreds of miles? And again, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, okay, you go from like Bakersfield to Stockton or whatever, like how 25 miles, right? But it's not. It's hundreds and hundreds of miles. And every mile, there's a farm road. What do you do? Well, they can't build a viaduct over the whole Central Valley for hundreds of miles. Like, that would be $1 trillion, right? But you also can't allow like just regular at-grade crossings at each of these farm roads, because if a train hit it, you derail the train. And inevitably, over the history of the high-speed rail train operating, you'd have it derail and kill people, and it'd be really bad. Like, good engineering practice does not allow you to have at-grade railroad crossings. So what looks like what they're doing is not every farm road, because that's too expensive, but like every other farm road, about every 2 to 3 miles, they're building a whole highway overpass for these mile block farm roads to go up high enough to cross over the train and come back down. I'm like, that's eye-popping, because, okay, 300 miles, one every 2 to 3 miles, you're building 100 structures just to get farm roads over. I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. So then the other is, I'm used to the railroad tracks just go right through the middle of the farm, because like, a stray cow hits it, well, that's splat, life goes on. But you can't have a cow wander out in front of, you can't even do like fencing material like this. So they're building like big concrete, almost like noise walls, but they're really strong, so that if the train derails, it has a structure to push against, so it doesn't just go plow through somebody's farmhouse or something. Like, it's really robust. I need to talk to High Speed Rail Authority. I'm hoping maybe at some point they give me a tour of it. But I'm looking at this thing going, that can't be cheap either. And it kind of clicked on me all of a sudden. I go, the reason why this project is costing so much may partially be to the fact that we never built high-speed rail in America, and there's all kinds of rules that require us to buy American, and there's nothing American to buy, so it's really expensive because you're having to not just pay to build the train, you have to build the train factory. But that aside, we're also building something really quality. Like I'm looking at this thing going, they're building this thing to last 200 years. Like it's built unbelievably, like to the point where what they're building up in the desert with private money to go to Vegas is not even the same thing. Like the thing they're building to Vegas is like a more, probably closer to like an Amtrak train. It's rated where in certain sections it can exceed 79 miles an hour, that Federal Railroad Administration speed limit. So it's technically high speed, but it's got so many sections where it follows the freeway and the curves are tight, and that train's got to slow way down to go around the corners. The California high-speed rail doesn't do that. When it makes a turn, and it has to wipe out an entire industrial park outside of Fresno to make that turn, because that turn takes miles. They'll buy the whole industrial park and they've torn it down, and the train's going right through it. They'll eventually sell the excess property and build around it, but but I'm looking at this going like, this is the California high-speed rail project. It might be a boondoggle in terms of dollars, and that's where our bus driver friend here is not wrong to be angry and want to kill the project just because it's so expensive. But I am saying we put a lot of money into it at this point, and we would be wasting a heck of a lot of money. Bonds we've got to pay back, that if we don't never generate any paying customers, how are we going to pay that back? And it will get built, because even if we mothball it now, we've built enough of it and future generations are going to want it. It's going to come back, and then 10 years from now we're back issuing new contracts to finish it. Like whether it takes us another 10 years or 100 years to do it, it's going to get built. And that's just where we're at. So that's where I've kind of softened up and said, fine, let's try to get some really good accountability in there. I'm grateful that the governor pumped the brakes on it a couple of years ago. He marketed it in a very deceptive way. He said that he killed the project, but he didn't. But what he did do is it was a warning shot to some of the consultants and things to basically say, like, we're the era of just letting you kind of freewheel whatever it was you wanted to do is over. We're tightening the oversight on it, and I think that's helped, because since then I've noticed, like, say I've gone out there and go, there's a lot of stuff that's gotten built, and yet there's still sections I wonder if it's even possible. The building from San Francisco all the way to Bakersfield, it's not going to be too bad, but if you get from Bakersfield to Palmdale, they got to do some kind of crazy tunnel, because like even the regular railroad track can't get up the hill. And so if you look on Google Maps, you'll see as you go from Bakersfield to up toward Tehachapi, there's a section where the railroad track does like a whole circle so that it can build up enough vertical climb to climb up like this. Well, the high-speed train can't do that, and so they got to tunnel through the mountain. And then you think that's bad, then going from Palmdale to Burbank, they're like, we have no idea how to get there, so we're just going to tunnel under the San Gabriel Mountains. Which is, don't get me wrong, and they build that thing, it's going to be amazing, because you'd be able to get, like, somebody can live in Palmdale and have a good paying job down in Burbank, and it's 30 minutes, because you're going 200 miles an hour under a mountain. The freeway can't beat that. That would be like 2 hours on the freeway in rush hour. You do it in 30 minutes. That's amazing. We're building something that's better than the freeway, if we can build it. And that's the question is, can you build a high-speed rail train that goes under a mountain at 200 miles an hour? I don't know. Like, has it been done? I don't know. If we do it, what kind of cost overruns are we running into? Like, there's some really, I absolutely am sympathetic to people who find this scary and just say, shut it down now. Quit throwing good money after bad. But bear with those of us that have a little more optimism and think like, it's going to be scary, and I don't know if it can be done, and the numbers are eye-popping, but maybe, just maybe, we can get this thing built. And if we get it built, I mean, Palmdale to Burbank in 30 minutes, just that'd be fantastic, right? So, anyway. Okay, let's catch up here. First of all, see any new super chats? Nope, the latest last one was from Pete. And then, let's see here. Ann Hansen writes, every railroad crossing was either over or under the right-of-way. Vehicle-train collisions would be a thing of the past. So in Southern California, that's been a thing for freight. Some of the freight trains coming out of the Port of Long Beach and Port of LA can be, I don't remember the number, but I want to say like 6 miles long or something ridiculous. And for a long time in the last 20 years, some cities in the San Gabriel Valley and Inland Empire got pretty mad because when those gates would go down, they'd be waiting 10, 15 minutes for the train because there was so much freight coming out of the harbor. And I think they've more or less separated it, which is good for safety. It's good for efficiency because the train goes over or under, cars go over and under, but in opposite, obviously. And life's good. But man, you get out to where I live, far into the Inland Empire, and there's San Mateo Canyon. If you're following along on Google Maps, you'll see that one of those railroads that goes all the way out to Bloomington where the big Union Pacific yard is, and then it splits off from there. And one of the freight lines kind of wanders away from I-10 a little bit and goes through San Mateo Canyon. And when you get there, it's rural and there are no bridges, no stoplights, it's all stop signs. And it's a great commuter shortcut for people who are cutting back and forth to go to Riverside for work. And I used to use that as a shortcut until I found every time I went through, I was waiting for a 15-minute train. And I don't go that way anymore because I'm tired of waiting for trains that are many miles long. So I agree with you. The more grade separation with rail, it's win-win. TH writes, what about sunk cost fallacy? Valid. You can't simply say, and I know I just said that you've sunk so much money into this train that you ought to, but bailing out of any endeavor by saying, well, it's sunk cost fallacy to pursue it is also a fallacy, right? So you say, sunk cost fallacy exists, but that also doesn't mean by default that you can't continue to invest in something that you've invested in. So I think if it was abundantly clear that the high-speed rail train couldn't be done, then yeah, that would be something that we should stop and not spend any more money on. But we can. So this is like this is a video series I really want to do maybe this summer, I don't know. I need to find the right people to interview because I need to get good data. And everybody who knows, I mentioned this to you before, everybody who has good knowledge of the high-speed rail project is so opinionated about their position that I'm not going to get neutral opinion. And everybody who might be neutral about it, well, they're neutral because they don't have access to the information. So it's hard to get, but there are pieces to consider. So Caltrain, which is the commuter rail system that goes from San Francisco down through San Jose to Gilroy, they've electrified their system. So it no longer runs on diesel, it runs on electric. And I believe part of that is to future-proof that rail corridor so that the high-speed rail train can also use the same tracks. So if I understand it correctly, from the Transbay Transit Center all the way out to the kind of going out toward Gilroy, the train is, the track, I think the infrastructure is more or less good to go. And then the Central Valley system, the Gilroy out to Bakersfield, well, that's the current construction package we're in right now. So most of California, most of the metropolitan areas in California, except for Southern California, will be good to go when this construction package finishes. So to me, it makes sense to finish the construction package. I think we're already into package 2 or 3, I think. So then it's, like I say, getting it Bakersfield to Palmdale's tricky. Getting it from Palmdale to Burbank down in the LA area is very tricky. That's the one part of this whole thing that I don't know, where you could argue sunk cost fallacy, because right now, even Amtrak, there's no way to take even a regular train from Los Angeles to Bakersfield. Amtrak operates a bus because there's no freight that goes over that hill. It's the San Gabriel Mountains and Tehachapi Mountains are so mountainous that a car is the only way over. And so if you could get high-speed rail over that, which is going to be very difficult to do, then you open the door to like all kinds of amazing things of travel in this state. Like it's so game-changing. And I'd love to see freight do the same thing. You know, part of me kind of says, like, sit down with Union Pacific and say, hey, if we're putting this tunnel in for you guys, for us, you guys want to chip in and we'll add one more track so you can run your freight through it too. You know, I don't know if they're going to do that, but I'm just saying, like, getting over that mountain would be so good in connecting the infrastructure of the state. Once you're into Burbank, well, getting LA to Anaheim and all that, they've got the right of way. Like it's just a matter of building it out. Anaheim's already built the station. So there's a lot of stuff already in place on the Southern California side, just waiting for the train to catch up with it. And then from there, it's pretty flat out to San Diego. It's flat out to San Bernardino. And those can cause some game-changing things too. Like if you had high-speed rail service from LA to San Bernardino with no stops, because that's the key of high-speed rail, you don't have that many stops. And you could go even 150 miles an hour. All of a sudden, what's a nasty commute, you'd have so many people who would gladly pay the ticket because they go, I can get all the way to Union Station and from San Bernardino in 26 minutes. Let's do it. Like seat to seat. Like that would be an hour, middle of the night. You can maybe do it in an hour if you speed. Hour and a half to 2 hours, you're trying to do it during rush hour. It's horrible. You know, like save so much time. So that's the thing, is like, yes, you can run into sunk cost fallacy. Yes, you can get Pollyanna stars in your eyes and lose track of the numbers and things. But I just remember that, like, when's the last time we've built something that just is jaw-dropping, that future generations are going to look at? Like, they built the 210 freeway. That's not something that people 100 years from now are going to go, boy, can you believe the people back in 2003 built this freeway? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's neat, but it's like, at the end of the day, it's a freeway. It's a suburban freeway. It wasn't that hard. But yet you go look at the Golden Gate Bridge, the Empire State Building, and things that at the time financially made no sense. They built the Empire State Building during the Depression. Like, that didn't make any sense, you know. And so to build out this high-speed rail network, if we can do it, is so human and so something to take pride in, like this thing that California has that could just generate so much economic activity. And I don't know, I'm excited because I want to see this thing happen. And I'm absolutely sympathetic to the critics. They're not wrong to bring up these problems. It's scary, but I still want to see it happen. Okay, let's see, check out, see what we got going on here. Hey, we got a super chat, double digit from Laza92. Good to see you. Laza92 writes, hey Rob, how familiar are you with the transportation logistics of the United States Postal Service? Some of my holiday cards have been delivered cross-country quicker than within my own state. Thanks and Merry Christmas. I know nothing about the logistics of the United States Postal Service, which is, but it's such a remarkable system. I know, who was I forget the YouTuber, but he's one of those guys, Tom Scott, I think, who retired recently from YouTube, who went to the, in Salt Lake City, they have where, I guess, all the handwritten addresses that we put on labels, they have really good OCR software that like 90-something% of them it can read. And so the ones that are just absolutely like unsalvageably bad handwriting, go onto a computer screen, and he showcased how this center trains employees to be able to read and code the addresses by hand so they get to where they're going to go. And that's just one tiny part of an enormously complicated logistics system. I know that if I send a letter in California, even within my own area, you know, I go from one town to the next, all of the letters go to the city of industry, run through machines there, and come back. It's easy. It's easier to centralize stuff, and so I wish I wish I knew more about the world of logistics. I remember the first time I heard the term logistics. When I was living in Oregon 20 years ago, I was chatting with somebody who I was church going back then. I was talking to somebody who went to the same church I did. And we were grabbing some lunch after church. And he was telling me that he worked for UPS, not the Postal Service, but the company, United Parcel System or whatever. And working for UPS, I said, "Oh, you deliver packages?" He said, "No. I'm in the logistics business." And he said, and I said, "Oh, so you help figure out where the packages go?" He says, "Not even for UPS." He says, "They have their own people internally who do that. I help businesses work with us to figure out what's the most efficient way to move things around from warehouses and suppliers and everything." And I thought, what a fun little niche industry, it's all these weird little industries that are just so niche and so boutique, and how cool is that? The few businesses that move enough stuff around through UPS that they want to figure that all out. Not even beginning to know how all of a sudden one day, 10 years later, my brother has a delivery box come, and it's breakfast cereal. And he bought it from a bookstore. And I go, "Why did you buy breakfast cereal on Amazon.com? It was the dumbest thing I ever heard." And he said, "Oh, they have this thing called Prime. And they'll ship me as much stuff as I want for free. And it comes right to my door. And I pay," I think back then it was like $20 a year or something. And I thought, how wasteful. So you made somebody drive their truck all the way to your front door for breakfast cereal. And now here we are. We're like nobody bats an eye. That, yeah, of course, Prime Pantry, you have your cereal delivered, And what's interesting is the state of California did a climate change study. They were looking at vehicle miles traveled. What's more efficient, having the delivery driver bring it to your house, because they can have multiple deliveries on one route, but they are driving a big truck, versus you driving your car to the store, selecting it yourself off the shelf, buying it and bringing it home. And yeah, you use less fuel because you have a little car instead of a big truck, but you only did one delivery versus multiple deliveries. And what they found is when it comes to Amazon, even with their big truck, they have so many customers now on that route that it's far more efficient, and it actually reduces greenhouse gas emissions to have a delivery person come deliver it. And I think back to 100 years ago when people would have milk delivered to their house and the milkman would come, and realizing that's kind of back where we are. Like, if you only have one delivery in your neighborhood, it's not very efficient. You have every. And then I got thinking, well, who's even bigger at logistics than Amazon? Would be the Postal Service, because they go to every single house every day. And I go, how you think about the efficiency? If we all had to drive to the post office to get our mail every day, we would consume far more fuel and put far more stress on the street than having the truck just come around your neighborhood once a day and drop it off. Anyway, I found that kind of interesting. I wish I had a better answer for you, Laza 92, of how your Christmas cards are moving around, because was that Christmas cards? Holiday cards. I have no idea. It could be You know, another thing to think about, and I don't know how their system works, but when you think about transportation, you have nodes and segments, right? So regular street, between stop signs or stoplights, you have segments. So to figure out how long it takes for you to travel down that segment, you take your average speed on that segment, 22 miles an hour or whatever, multiplied by, the length of the segment, half a mile, and you say, okay, and you can calculate, distance and speed, and get a time out of it. That's how many seconds it takes for you to drive. And then you have the nodes, which is, okay, each node, I'm stopped on average at the stop sign 11 seconds, or at the stoplight 32 seconds. Over the course of a week of hitting green lights and red lights, I wait on average 32 seconds. And then you start adding those points and nodes together and you get your total travel time. And it could be that when you're going all the way across the country, there are kind of like express paths where they're like, okay, once that package gets to that holiday card gets to Kentucky, it gets on a truck, and that truck doesn't stop until it gets to Fresno, where we sort it back out or whatever. Like, I don't know. And so it could be there's fewer nodes, where maybe within California it's like, oh, well, it's got to go from LA to LA distribution, and LA distribution to City of Industry, and City of Industry to a sorting facility in Sacramento, and then sorting facility in Sacramento to Yuba City, and then from Yuba City to, and so maybe that holds it up, is it's just got more nodes in the system versus the line segment, maybe the ground transportation goes really fast. Maybe because you sent it first class, they actually got it onto airmail, and able to throw a bag on a plane, and it just really jumped the line, I don't know. If it's stamped, you wouldn't have a tracking number, but it would be kind of fun if you did have a tracking number to kind of look and see, like, I've noticed that sometimes when I've sent things where, one morning, FedEx overnight air is this way, where it's the thing I ordered was in New York when I went to bed, and I woke up in the morning, it was already on my porch, and I'm in California, and you get looking, you're like, okay, it left some airport in New Jersey, and then it was in Burbank at 4 a.m., and then it was on the truck by 6, and it was on my porch by 8, And so there are some pretty neat things they can do if they, but anyway, I'm not going to make up an answer. I don't know how USPS works. I do appreciate your super chat, and it warrants a better answer than that, but all right, let's find something to chat about here in the live chat, and then I'm going to keep walking to somewhere more interesting than having you stare at the fence for the 101 freeway. Oh, it's talking about SpaceX, huh? Zach Schramm says, I've been to Lombard and hiked up the Coit Tower afterward. Oh, that's cool. Let's see. The thing Raymond writes, the thing Americans amaze me is that they know how centralized facility is the most efficient way to deliver packages, but somehow fail to realize that the same thing is true for public transit. Well, you got to have the public transit connect to things. So there's a lot of challenge. Like, America's land rich. You have an area, the lower 48 states, that has more room in it than most of Central Europe, the continent. But the continent, you got a lot more population. And your towns, your major metropolitan areas can get fairly close together, one to the next. And so you end up with where the rail made a lot of sense. After the war, most cities in Europe decided to reinvest in building the traditional cities that used to be there. You guys didn't have to. You could have done like we did in North America. After the war, we were building cities for the first time, And so it wasn't that we were rebuilding anything. We didn't get blown up during the war. But But we decided to say, hey, if we're building something from the ground up, let's just lean into people owning property. You know, America's entire history has been about getting people land. So in the 1800s, it was various homestead acts where you could go out to Oklahoma and other places and get, you know, your 40 to 360 some odd acres of land for free. All you had to do is show the government you homesteaded it, and the federal government gave it to you because it was good for the nation. It was grow the economy, increase our agriculture, and more importantly, make it difficult for other countries to reconquer it because Americans were living on it. Caused a lot of conflicts with the indigenous people, though, and they kind of got screwed on the deal. But for the United States itself, the Homestead Act built sort of an agricultural middle class where instead of people working for the farmer, they were the farmer. And that worked great until industrialization consolidated all the farms. They didn't have to have farmers. Now it says San Francisco General, but it doesn't say anything about Zuckerberg. I thought it would say Zuckerberg all over it. So that's where you get the movie The Grapes of Wrath, is industrialization had gotten so good at using tractors and big companies coming in and buying up all the farms. And then you get into the Dust Bowl where they mismanaged the farms and all the topsoil blew away. And what people do, well, you know, the Jode family throw all the junk on the back of their Model A and drive to California and try to survive, and it didn't go well for them. So you get to end of World War II, about 20 years later, and we said, well, what can we do to build up the economy of the United States? We say, oh, well, let's get land in the hands of people. Well, we can't give them farms, so what we do is they need to get to the city so they can have a job. So we'll build a big freeway network that will connect the city out to land outside of town that's cheap and easy to develop. We'll chop it all up into quarter-acre lots, try to, you know, subsidize the mortgages or guarantee the mortgages or do whatever we can so that everybody can buy their little piece of it. And there were problems. You know, in this case, it wasn't the indigenous people who got into trouble. It was racial and ethnic minorities who banks excluded from getting them loans, clear up into the 1960s. So they missed out on 20 years of getting in and getting the cheapest homes right after the war. But for a lot of people, and even people after the Fair Housing Act in the 1966 or whatever, it gave people that first opportunity to get into where you could have a working class job, a high school diploma, and America, by subsidizing the freeways and the mortgages and things, made it where we could chop up the land into little pieces and everybody could have a piece of the land. And that made people invested in their communities. They wanted to be involved to make sure that their communities were good and safe, and you know, they'd run for city council and all kinds of good things that could happen if somebody's putting down roots and living in that house for a long time. And that worked great until this time it's not industrialization that's killing us, it's investors coming in, bought up all the houses. And it's very difficult. We've added a lot of common sense environmental rules, some maybe with less common sense. And all the good lots that make a lot of cheap houses, we fill them up. And so, you know, if you're here in the San Francisco Bay Area and you want to go buy a house on a cheap piece of land, you're on the freeway for 2 hours. You're going out to the central, literally to the Central Valley. There's bad traffic out toward Manteca and Stockton, which may as well be its own region. It's far enough away, but that's the first place where you start to find cheap developable land. So it's not working anymore. And so it's easy, I could see from a European perspective, where you already had cities that are very friendly for transit, because these are cities that existed long before the cars. They have to be walkable. And so when you get off the train, you have somewhere to walk to. well, it's easy to kind of judge that and say, well, why are you Americans such fools? Why didn't you build it the right way the first time? And the answer is, well, we were trying to do the right thing the first time anyway. So you have, you know, a goal in America of trying to get as much land into private hands as you can, because that's how people can build wealth. You know, if you have a mortgage, you rent control yourself because your mortgage payment doesn't go up but for taxes and insurance. The mortgage principal amount stays the same. Mortgages in the United States, you set if you get a fixed loan, you set that interest rate based on when you originate the loan. So even if interest rates skyrocket, you're locked in. You have 6%. That's what you have, you know. And so it's an amazing form of rent control that helps create a lot of stability until somebody has to move, or the growing epidemic in this country, there's not enough cheap inventory to let people buy into the market in the first place. I mean, these little houses running along here, $1 million easy, probably $2 million. And none of them look like anything to write home about. Nothing special about those houses, just there's not enough of them. And so to get one, you got to go out to Stockton and drive 2 hours. And then what do you tell that person? Oh, you horrible, horrible person. You're creating all this greenhouse gas emission and destroying the planet because you wanted to live in a house. And it's like, no, they wanted an opportunity to buy into something that provided financial security because the price doesn't go up. Because if you rent, you're either in a rent-controlled place, which is very rare to get. There isn't much rent control, even in California. And landlords of rent-controlled places tend not to do much to fix the place up because they know they're not making much money on it. And the other option is just play the market and then going, well, I was doing okay in this city, but then the rent kept going up. Now I can't afford to live here anymore. It's every time I get a pay raise, I go backwards because the rent goes up faster than the income. So can you blame somebody for saying, hey, America's set up to subsidize freeways and private land ownership. All I have to do is sit in my car 4 hours a day in traffic. And so that's what we do. So that's the question, is can we move on to a third American dream that puts a degree of land ownership of some kind into the hands of regular people so they have that security that America's known for, but do it maybe in a little more responsible way that, as you say, leans into the centralized idea of using a kind of hub and spoke model or a multinodal model where people don't have to drive. Is there a type of high density housing that's family friendly, promotes ownership, so you're not just renting, but you actually own the thing? And that's one of my concerns I've had right now with a lot of the high density projects I have seen in the United States. They're almost all exclusively for rent. And I'm concerned about that because that doesn't promote financial security for people. It's not what I want. I'm not opposed, if I ever got married and had kids, I'm not opposed to living in something high density as long as I'm near a park. There's decent schools, there's other kids in the neighborhood, and I can own the place, so I can have some security. And my worry is that with rentals, increasing rents price people out to where they're not able to, families aren't going to stay there because, it's expensive to raise kids, and so you're going to move. So even if I can afford to stay in the neighborhood, well, if the other families can't afford to stay in the neighborhood, my kids won't have any friends, So, which are still hypothetical because I don't have any kids. But, so I guess if you're looking at this from a European perspective, be gentle with us. It's not like America sat down one day and said, we want to do the most reckless and irresponsible thing we can think of. That was never the goal. The goal was to use America's land, which we're very rich in, to try to promote a middle class. And I think for the most part, it actually has been far more positive than negative. but it's good to focus on the negatives because obviously, like Southern California, they're here in the Bay Area. We don't have more Bay Area land to give to sell off cheap to people so they can get their start. And so that's where you have to start looking at higher densities and saying, well, some of these lots are so many feet wide and you have one household living on it. Do you legalize it that if somebody owns their building and wanted to do something denser or taller, you free them to do it? Because that would allow 2 or more families to buy in and share that piece of land. You know, I think that's valid, you know, and then the more density you have, the more it lends itself to that centralized transit that you're thinking of. So, well, let's see, what part of the city are we getting back toward? That's what's kind of fun is there's already incredible density in this city, and yet despite that, it's the most unaffordable place in the country. And I think that discourages people who, you know, go to Southern California and say, if we just make it more dense, it'll curb demand. And I think there's truth to that. But the question is, can the market keep up? Are there constraints in New York City, for instance, where they can do high-rise buildings all the time, that one could argue, oh, if you just got those pesky rules out of the way, New York City could finally provide adequate housing for demand and the city would be affordable? I don't know. Because what do you do if you already have a 10-story building on the block but the market's demanding 30 or 40 stories? But the 10-story building's perfectly good. They have a parklet there. They trade some of the on-street parking for extra restaurant space. Down in Southern California, we call that al fresco dining. Up here in San Francisco, they call it a parklet, which is a clever name because it's, I don't know, it sounds cute. Let makes it sound small. But I like the word park in it because they're converting a parking space into one of those parklets. So. Okay, well, let's see. We got more super chats. This one from Fat_Russian. Fat Russian. Well, thank you for your double-digit super chat. You write, since finding your channel, I'm attentive to road upgrades and interested in how it happens. You had convinced me to be forgiving of road work and looking forward to it in my city. Stay awesome. That's from Fat Russian. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's, you know, one of the, probably the second worst thing is to find out they're tearing your road apart to build something new. And I say it's the second worst thing because the worst thing is that they didn't touch your road at all. You know, roads wear out. They're like cars or anything else. They have a lifespan, they come apart. And it's kind of hard to see when there's a major improvement, like they're fixing up a street so it can handle the traffic better and be better for pedestrians and things. And they'll make, oh, there's a car, so that's a non-Waymo car with some type of LiDAR thing on the roof. But it's weird, it's flat like a skateboard instead of the round like swooshy thing. So it had some company name on it I didn't recognize, but that's got to be another self-driving car company. And you know, here on the news, critics, to go back to the John and Ken show at KFI, where they'll say, John and Ken are millionaires who, their shtick was dumping on the city of Los Angeles and saying how much it sucks. And the shtick really resonated with a generation older than mine who owned houses and agreed that LA wasn't like what it was in 1967, and they wished it still was. But for those of us who weren't born then, the shtick gets a little old to hear millionaires complaining about Los Angeles. But that was one of their complaints, is they'd say, oh, well, the worst part of this construction is think of all the hassle it's going to be for the year while the road's all apart. As if there's no long-term thinking of like the benefits of what the road's going to be like after it's No, the only thing is to look at the short-term hassle of getting the project done. I sit there and say, well, they're not wrong. It's the short-term hassle. It's good for people in their agencies and their construction staging to be sensitive and put together a good plan that minimizes disruption, get people to their houses. At the same time, to say, oh, well, the reason why we're not going to widen this road is because, or make an improvement to this transportation corridor, is because of the inconvenience it'll be while the project's being built. I think it's a pretty short-sighted reason not to build something, you know. Thank you. We got, I'm trying to think what street I'm at. Harrison, I think. Kind of fun. They always talk about what a bay window is, and that's literally a bay window. So you can see the bay out your window. They never made sense where I grew up. There was nothing to look at. So you have these cheap tract homes, like in West Valley City, Utah, and they put the house is just a big rectangular box. But on the upgrades, the people who had the money to spend the extra few $1,000s, they could have a bay window in their living room. And it was this goofy looking thing that hung out. But when you come here to the Bay Area, a bay window kind of makes sense. It lets you get a view down the street of something much more interesting than just your neighbor across the street. So it's kind of fun to actually see them in person. Gives you a little extra space in your room as well, because it's like an airspace thing, because there's sidewalk underneath. I wonder legally, from a deed perspective, how a bay window works exactly, but that's clever. That's the sort of thing that I don't know most cities' code would ever allow, but such an efficient use of space of saying, yeah, go ahead and let the building hang out over the sidewalk a few feet. I think that makes it kind of fun. Okay, let's see what other chats I'm missing out here. Dylan Cook writes, bay windows are also good for plant lovers. I have about 20 plants all around my bay window. I tell you that at the time I tried to grow a palm tree indoors. So there was a Long Beach, California based store called Bilo. And Bilo had stores all over the South Bay, like around Long Beach, and then randomly had one store in Provo, Utah. And for some reason, Bilo decided to stock the exact same inventory in their Provo store that they stocked in Long Beach. Now, Provo is a cold climate. You know, Utah, famous for skiing, and it's frozen, as we were talking earlier in the live stream with, oh shoot, I forgot his name. He came by earlier. We're talking how he didn't go to the University of Utah after all, and how cold Utah can be. A start for a palm tree to grow in your yard doesn't make sense in Provo, Utah. But I wanted one, so I bought it. I put it by the window. I didn't have a bay window, but I put it by the window, the sliding glass window, and I watered it, and it just died. It needs to be full sunlight. And that's the catch-22, is those palm starts have to be outside and get tons and tons of sunlight. But if I did that, it gets too cold in Utah, they'd freeze. I suppose if I took the palm tree outside all day and then got home early enough each night to bring it in, I probably could have kept it alive a little bit longer. But instead, I just watch each palm frond turn brown and die one at a time. But it wasn't growing up to make up for it. So eventually, the whole palm tree just ended up in the trash. So, but that was a fun summer. I think I went through 2 or 3 palm starts. I probably could have had it outside, but if I'd had a bay window like you described, maybe I could have thrown enough sunlight at it. But this is interesting here at Shotwell Street, to try to prevent when the traffic builds up on Mission Street, which is the next one over, kind of the main street. They here at Shotwell, they put some barriers here where somebody on a bicycle could get through there, but it makes it really difficult for a car to treat this as a through street. And that's smart. There's different kinds of traffic calming. You can do traffic calming for speed, and that's speed humps and putting little diversions and little mini roundabouts and things to get people to slow down. But there's also traffic calming for volume, trying to reduce the number of cars that cut through a neighborhood street that really isn't intended for through traffic. The through traffic is supposed to be over here off of Mission. So this bicyclist, he can go straight through. That's fine. They don't mind bicycles using that as their through street. Excuse me. But they don't want cars cutting through. The city of Los Angeles does not do this, and I love the Waze app because it finds me all kinds of shortcuts through people's neighborhoods, and I'm always shocked that they didn't bother to do anything to prevent me. And so when I'm on La Cienega Boulevard going up, or Beverly Boulevard, or one of those going up toward, I always like to eat at Cantor's Deli, which is an old kind of Hollywood deli, Jewish deli, in the Fairfax district of LA, coming off the 10 freeway. Well, I think it's on La Cienega, or it's on Fairfax. Fairfax Avenue slammed. It's tons of traffic. So Waze says, oh, we'll just go 1 block to the east. And then I zip through the neighborhood 1 block to the east and just skip all the traffic. This prevents it because you have to make a right turn coming out. So if I'm coming this way to parallel Mission, and so I'm coming on Shotwell this way, I come here, I can't keep going straight, I can't go left, I have to go right. And it zigzags it enough where it makes it difficult to cheat. And so that's some good planning there. You know, that's a catch-22 of the way we build suburban streets versus the cities. San Francisco is built before the car, so it's a big grid, even if there are places where it doesn't make sense. And the problem with the street grid being a grid is, like I'm talking about, the street you're supposed to use with your car, there's all kinds of parallel alternatives. And so that's a way of breaking up the grid so that the other streets aren't through streets without losing the efficiency the grid provides. You know, for walking around or bicycling around, a grid is great because it gives you, you don't have to go a long circuitous route. What we did in the American suburbs, North American suburbs, is build a lot of winding, dead-end, streets that don't make a whole lot of sense on purpose because it forces you onto the streets where you're supposed to go. Well, this is Van Ness. Okay, so we're not to Mission yet. But the problem with building the suburban streets like we do, they do a great job of trying to push all the traffic onto the through streets and keep them out of your neighborhood. But the problem is it also keeps people on foot and on bicycle out of your neighborhood too, or it keeps them off entirely because you have to go so far out of your way to take these winding streets that it's not efficient anymore. It's also why you see an epidemic of people driving their kids to school. You know, if you have a really efficient path for a kid to walk to school, one that's safe and has good crossings, by about 2nd or 3rd grade, you know, especially if kids have friends to walk with, they can walk to school. But parents are dropping their kids off, and I don't think it's entirely stranger danger. I think it's more car danger. They're like, I can't let my kid walk to school. They'll get smushed. You know, and plus it's such an inefficient route to go. So here's another one. This one's interesting here because this traffic calming doesn't necessarily look permanent. You know, they've kept some of the traffic control devices here. The stop sign's still in place. They do have an end sign, though, that does look a bit permanent here. But what it does do is it does stop traffic from going through, but it wouldn't be that difficult if the city had to reopen the street for some reason. These look like they just fold over. These are interesting here. So they're locked, but So they're not a completely deformable flappy barrier. They have some permanence to them, but it's not the commitment of actually pouring concrete and permanently closing it off. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, well, let's stop for a moment, take a look and see what you're talking about, and get caught back up with your conversation here. Slug Biker writes, emergency vehicles have access, though. I'd hope so, but those look like you have to unbolt them. So they don't look, doesn't look terribly easy to get those things to fold down. It looks like it would take a maintenance crew a little bit of time working on them to get them open. I was thinking, well, is it the type, like if you press really hard on it, does it pop down? It's like a big fire truck to go through. I think if it was life and death, I think a fire truck could smash through that and just break it. Like it doesn't look that tough. You know, it's not like a anti-terrorism bollard or something like you'd see, you know, near a sporting event or something, you know. But I wouldn't try to go through it in my Honda, I'll put it that way. So Hogan Vandermuller writes, hey Rob. Oh, hello. Johnny Harrison writes, what cross street are you on, Rob? I want to look on Street View and see when those were installed. I am at, so South Van Ness was a block over and I'm on 21st. So I'm a block west of, so it's 21st Street, not Avenue. And like I said, I think I'm between Van Ness and I think that's Mission, the next one over. But I can't read the sign from here to see what street this is. Let's see what else we got here. Username incoming writes, what do you think of Canadian road sign signals compared to the American ones? So they have a MUTCD, a manual on uniform traffic control devices. They more or less copy what we do in the United States and then just tweak it a little bit to be Canadian. And that's kind of interesting because there are some countries, there are really two standards that people lean into, and I believe Australia and New Zealand, I believe, also kind of lean into a variation of our MUTCD. One of the two does anyway, I think Australia. And Canada definitely does. Their road signs are very similar to America. But Mexico lean into the international standard that is common in Europe. And so it's kind of interesting that you don't, you know, my gut instinct is to say, oh, well, we're all North America, so we're going to use something that's similar to the US standard. But I don't believe Mexico follows that at all. I think they signed on to this international one. And theoretically, the US would too, but it's kind of hard because I believe our MUTCD predates the international, I think they call it, I want to say Geneva Convention, but that doesn't sound right. They had something else. But there's an international standard, and the name of the escapes me, for road signs that we could adopt as well. But you know, the MUTCD works well for us, and the MUTCD also leans more into words because Canada and the United States, Australia, it's all English speakers, and so it's really common. For instance, if you have a street that's a dead end, we don't put some kind of symbol because the theory is this is the U.S. Everybody's going to speak in English. So you just put up a sign that says dead end. And these type of warning signs are fantastic because you can put up signs that you never could come up with a symbol for. I mentioned in my MUTCD video a couple of years ago, Caltrans needed a way to tell tractor trailer drivers, oh, here comes a Waymo. Missed it. Where'd he go? Where'd he go? You see the little thing on the roof of his car there. Caltrans needed a way to tell tractor trailer truck drivers, you can take this weird freeway off ramp that hooks and comes around onto the 60 freeway, but if you do it, if you have too long of a wheelbase between, and terminology, I don't know tractor trailer terminology, but the kingpin and the rear axle, if it was more than a certain distance, you'd have rear wheel cheat where those back wheels would start wanting to cut on the grass and it wouldn't work right. So they basically said, they put up one of those yellow warning signs but wrote in it something like kingpin to rear axle more than so many feet, not advised, or something. The European standard that leans on symbols, because you have people speaking all kinds of different languages on the continent, makes a lot of sense when people are speaking a whole bunch of different languages, but it comes at the cost that you can't come up with a traffic symbol for every circumstance that could come up. And so the United States, by being able to lean into English and just say in plain English, we're just going to write down, beware of falling rock or whatever, tends to work pretty well. We use symbols too, but the one I see here in California a lot is, and it took me some time to learn it, I was a little slow picking up on it, was when the right lane of the freeway forces you to exit, it says through traffic, merge left. And it actually makes sense. I was used to the symbol, and it took me some time to get used to it. Now that's a common enough occurrence. Caltrans should just use the symbol. And so Canada has the same flexibility we do in the United States, where they can just write in plain English right on the sign what it is they want it to say, and come up with scenarios that are specific to that area. Oh, here comes another Waymo. This is really common. These cars are everywhere. But those are the ones you see all over the place with the spinning thing on the roof. And the ones I could say I've seen some other ones. I tried to chase after that one a moment ago that looked like a big surfboard. And then if I make it over to Valencia Street, I don't know if that Prius is still parked there, but I just got a kick out of it because it looked like something somebody had built themselves. But okay. Oh, we have a super chat. This one is from the Dotard Ephelist. I was going to say Elfist, but there's no L. So forgive me for butchering your name, but it's the Dotard Ephelist. Anyway, thank you for your super chat. You write, any chance you'll cover the 401 Ontario freeway in Ontario and Toronto, Ontario? Yeah, I want to. I have never left the United States. I need to change. I have a passport, so I'm not your typical American who doesn't even have a passport. I've got one. I planned to leave the United States, but I think I got excited to go see Europe out of college. My first job out of college, it was one of the few times in radio where I actually made some money, and I saved up like $10,000, and more money than I'd ever had in my life. And I said, well, I'm gonna go see Europe. And then I had a choice. Did I want to buy a car? And I thought, yeah, I'd rather buy a car. And that's how I bought my Honda Fit. I still drive it today. All 350,000 miles I've put on it. And I don't regret it. And I've gotten to see an enormous amount of this country, but it's come at the cost of going to Europe, and I've never seen Europe. And I thought, well, I live in California, at least go down and see Tijuana, say I've been to Mexico. And then COVID hit, and so I thought, well, I'm definitely not going to go see it now. And then now I'm at a point where I've just been so busy with work and things, I haven't made it anywhere. Canada is very possible. That would be a very accessible place to go. A few story ideas that I thought would be fun if I could get there would be, they make a big deal about building apartments on top of a Costco in LA. But if you go to Vancouver, British Columbia, they've already done it. So I thought that would be kind of fun, but I'd have to get up to Vancouver. And then the other would be obviously the 401. I think it's the widest freeway in the world, or in North America. But what makes the 401 so interesting, and I'd love to see it in real life, is that it's not like they just dumped 12 lanes all together and just said, okay, go nuts, have fun. They're separated into collector distributor roads and express lane roads and things. It looks like there's a lot of method to the madness, and it would be kind of fun to marry the idea of people who hate freeways and use the 401 as an example of like an absolute failure of planning, with the practical reality of why the 401 got built the way it did in the first place. And, you know, as much as it's fun to vilify, people find it fun to vilify cars. I don't like to, because I like cars, but as much as easy it is to do that, a lot of times there's a method to the madness. Why did we build the 401 like that in the first place? And what lessons can we learn from it? For instance, even in America, where maybe the freeway's only 4 lanes wide instead of, you know, 20 or whatever the 401 is, you have 4 or 5 lanes going in the same direction. Well, what if we took that 4-lane freeway and split it? You had 2 through lanes and 2 collector distributor lanes. You know, that might help the flow in an area where there's a lot of frequent freeway interchanges, where they're spaced, the on and off ramps are spaced too close together, and so maybe separating that out for a while could be a good thing. You know, Utah's playing with, and this would be one that would be a related story to the 401. They're playing with the idea of saying, what if we took like 15 miles of freeway and did that? Chopped the freeway in half and basically said, okay, if you're planning to go all the way to downtown, stay to the left and you won't have any exits for like 10 miles. And if you're planning to get off at any of the exits, you go to the right. And so that way you have 2 separate freeways. Oh, we got another, these Waymo cars are just everywhere. Everywhere. I got to ride one of those in LA. It was a lot of fun. So anyway, yeah, so to answer your question, there is absolutely a chance I'd cover the 401 in Toronto. But it comes down to, first of all, I got to make sure I have a good enough car to get to Toronto. And I don't know if the car I own now is the car to do it. So, but I've been very frugal and hanging on to some money in anticipation that I have to get something else. And I've been kind of eyeballing used Priuses. So that might be the successor. I wish Honda sold the Honda Fit still, because I would go today on a loan. If I go get a brand new Honda Fit, either stick shift or hybrid, no automatics for me. Hybrid's worth it, but no more transmission failures for me. But if I go get a stick shift Honda Fit for $20,000, I'd do it right now. But you can't. You have to get a used one. The used ones go for $20,000, and I'm not paying $20,000 for a 5-year-old Honda Fit. It's stupid. So, okay, there's honking. Let's go find out what's going on. And I see a super chat coming in too, which I will talk. You're up next. But I want to first find out why people are all honking at each other. Oh, it's a semi-truck trying to make it around a corner. Well, that makes it a real challenge. So everybody's having to back up so he can make the corner. I think I've seen how this story ends. And in New York, it ended with a lot of swearing and about 5 wrecked parked cars. This is why American suburbs got built the way they got built. You build cities for people, but what we forget is, well, people need stuff, and stuff comes in trucks. And so if you build a city that's almost impossible to drive a truck in, you end up with this kind of a situation where the truck gets stuck. And people are having to turn around and give up and go the other way. And the thing is, like, it's easy to make fun and to say, well, you know, stupid truck. But it's like, well, deliveries have to get made. Like how do you get stuff to the businesses? And so after the war, when we built suburbs in America, we said, well, let's build big wide roads with big wide radii on each corner, so it's really easy for the trucks to come in and deliver. And we built something that works really well. You know, it's lent itself to a culture of Walmarts and big box stores, but it's also it makes it difficult, you know, because now you got a little mini crisis going on here, where everybody's trying to figure out how to deal with this truck that's stuck. And it's, again, not really the truck's fault. It's you know, unless this is a street that prohibits trucks But what do you do with something like this? And it's, I guess, routine enough. San Francisco PD just rolled by on the Main Street, couldn't care less. Okay, so they're trying to back out, it looks like. Hear a lot of whistling. So they must have determined that trying to make a right-hand turn on this street is just not going to happen. There's a difference between the West Coast and the East Coast. The video in New York, the driver doubled down and just smashed up all the parked cars and kept on going. And I guess out west they realized, okay, I can back the truck up. There's no harm in that. It's a lot cheaper. Challenge though, because it is jamming up two streets. This poor Waymo car, well, that's interesting. What's the Waymo car doing? It backed itself up. It looked like it was trying to pass. So I don't know what. Okay, what does it decide to do? You know, a human driver can get creative and do stuff that's, you know, in a legal gray area, but nobody's going to bat an eye. Oh, we almost got this free. Well, that Waymo may just keep going then. Do we hear some rejoicing? The truck resumes heading down a different road, not getting stuck, and a lot of buildup here of people who are probably pretty unhappy to wait for that. So that's interesting. Okay, well, let's get caught up. There's a super chat here from Bad Drivers of North Central Maryland. Good to see you again. Hey Rob, what are your thoughts on the New Jersey Turnpike, where they essentially make it two highways in one? The car-only lane, truck car lanes. I tell you, if money, you had unlimited land and unlimited money, you would never see big rig trucks and cars mix. And everybody would love that. The challenge I run into is that money is an object, space is an object. They were able to do something really neat, being able to separate it out. I'm particularly for a specific highway in New Jersey you're talking about, and so I had to pull my other phone out and look at, there's another Waymo. I tell you, they're everywhere. But let's stop for a sec. Let's pull the map out and look. If you're on the live chat, if you give me the highway number, I'll actually pull it up here. Let's see. So it's the New Jersey Turnpike, where you have a separation. I haven't spent that much time in the Northeast, and so my familiarity with it is not as good. But let's take a look. So this is the phone that last time when we were meeting up in Portland, I was going to use this so we could go for a ride and actually scooter all around the city. And I even went back to my car to look for it. Remember, if you joined us that day? And I found it. I have this shelf in the cargo area. I set this on top of the shelf and I didn't see it. Okay, so do we have the southern half is just the New Jersey Turnpike. Okay, so New Jersey Turnpike. But there are perennial topics that come up that I know, like I say, if I get a better car, I just need to do some of these longer trips and do. And one of them is the New Jersey jug handle. I mean, that's like the rationale behind it, and really talk to somebody who knows the history of New Jersey transportation, maybe somebody at New Jersey DOT or one of the older cities, you know, maybe they know a retired engineer or somebody, because it would be fascinating to get in and figure out, like, The other is use modeling software to say, well, okay, if you just did a normal left-hand turn lane, what kind of performance can you get out of the intersection versus the jug handle? You know, the jug handle, the traffic is hitting the intersection at a higher speed, but some of the people using the jug handle, I think they have to hit the intersection twice, right? No, yeah, because if you are turning left, you got to go through, we got to wait your turn to go through, jug handle around like this, and then go through the intersection again. So half of the turning vehicles, I don't know. So that's why I say, if the jug handle was really efficient and really fantastic, we would have jug handles in all 50 states, but we just have them in New Jersey. So that's one. The other one's the Michigan lefts. That's one I gotta. Okay, so it looks like 95. New Jersey, we put the satellite on here. So, okay, I see what you're saying. So, you want to take a look there. That's what you're talking about there. So they have one big slab of pavement here, but they separate it. So you have a section for cars and a section for trucks. That's all. That's, like I say, in an ideal world, that would be excellent. And it looks like, is that relatively new? Because when I go to the street view, oh, my barrier disappeared and it's all just one slab of pavement. So that's interesting. But the street view shows, oh, I'm at the wrong spot. That's why. They removed it. Okay, so let me see if I can get a dot here. Okay. So if we get looking here on street view. Yeah. So they have, what have they done? That is not how I expected. So I expected that you'd have the northbound side have the road split and the southbound side have the road split. And the outside would be trucks and any cars who want to join in or are going slow. And then kind of faster lanes in the middle, both directions. But take a look at this. So, okay, why am I backwards? Why am I driving on the wrong side of the road? Well, it's because I'm not. Because if you pivot this way, I am driving on the right side of the road. But I'm in the middle and I'm driving the other way. So what they've done is they have the northbound and southbound redundant side by side. So then what I'd take a look at is I'd say, well, are there adjacent freeway interchanges? And so really they're just doing two freeways side by side one another. So then I take a look back, I zoom out. Oh, what a mess. So right next to that, this is why I hate old school toll roads, because I'm used to very direct, efficient interchanges like you have in California. I was talking earlier about taking freeway connectors at 55 miles an hour, 85, and being able to just fly from one freeway to the next. And then you hit Chicago, and all heck breaks loose as you head east, as you start to see that. All these little trumpet interchanges that all go together, and it's absolute chaos to be able to go from one freeway to the next. And why? The only reason they did that, it's not because it's cheaper. They did it because they were trying to shove you through a toll booth. And now with electronic tolling, there's no need for that. They could just have a normal interchange, but we're stuck with that because that's what got built because it was a toll booth. When they could just, increase the gas tax and pay for this and pay the bonds off with the gas tax, they have something more efficient, which is what we do out west. So I don't know. Oh man, is this where it crisscrosses? So I see what he's talking about here. That to enter that area, the freeway literally braids. It crisscrosses. Check that out. That is wild. That is wild. I got to drop a pin on that and see what it looks like in Street View. Yeah, New Jersey's a fascinating place. Because nobody ever thinks about New Jersey. Because when you have New York next door, New York's getting all the attention. And so New Jersey's kind of this forgettable cousin next door, but it's like Tony Soprano is New Jersey, like the Jersey jug handle. All the people who can't afford to live in Manhattan live in New Jersey. the Statue of Liberty is technically in New Jersey. I mean, it's not legally, but geographically it is. Like, it's just the governor of New Jersey almost got killed in a car accident because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, because he was racing to a meeting between the Rutgers basketball team and radio host Don Imus, who said something racist about them. Like, New Jersey's just wild. Then you see something like this where they go to enormous expense to build like a big freeway interchange to braid everything. It's not as intense looking, in person, but definitely on the diagram, it's wild, just like I have two freeways side by side. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like I explore a lot of California because it's accessible and it's close by, and there's a lot of interesting transportation in California. But that's not to underplay 49 other states, and some of them, like I say, like New Jersey, there's a lot of transportation going on in New Jersey. The PATH trains and the tunnel that they're working on, that another governor canceled 15 years ago, and now they're having to spend even more money to build the tunnel now. But it's just wild. That same governor who got into a scandal because he punished a city by having the Department of Transportation close off lanes on the freeway so people would jump off the freeway to divert through his city because he didn't like what the city was doing. Like, New Jersey is just, it's wild. Yeah. So and I can see why it does the braid, is if you get looking here, the freeway splits. So you see that split there. So you have a braid back here, and then you have the freeways running side by side, and then they split. So that makes sense. I guess there's operational efficiency of being able to. It's something probably to do with that messy interchange with the toll booths, and so it made sense to keep them split up. And it looks like that way I don't know. I don't know what. I think it's so when you come out of the toll booths, you can already select which of the two roads you want. And so if you have all the toll booths enter in on the right-hand side, but that right-hand side ends up going toward Manhattan, or goes toward North Bergen, and the left-hand side goes on to 95 and keeps going north. Then you have a lot of people entering from that toll booth, and they're trying to cut over a bunch of lanes to get over to hit 95. And so if you keep it split earlier on and allow them to put two ramps, because you see there's a ramp coming out of the toll booth, both, you kind of see here, both two directly in to hit that right hand side, but also this one that swoops around farther to hit 95. And so that prevents a lot of lane changes that would jam the freeway up. And maybe that's a recent fix. Maybe it used to be that way and they've changed it. I'd argue, get rid of the stupid toll booth interchange and just require Easy Pass and build the right thing rather than putting this huge Band-Aid on it. But New Jersey, they did it the Jersey way. So, all right. Well, thanks again for the super chat there from Bad Drivers in North Central Maryland. I like driving in Maryland a lot better than New Jersey, I bet. I haven't driven in either state, but I just looking at the map. Maryland, if I ever made it out there, I'd check out the I-70 section that never got built. They have this little section of freeway in, I believe, in Baltimore that doesn't go anywhere because 70 terminates outside the city. It doesn't go all the way in like it's supposed to. Josh Myatt with a $3.17 super chat, which is kind of fun, which means either it converted from another currency or you're just a fan of... I had fun one time. I took Back to the Future and I edited clips from it and made Doc Brown sound dumb. And at the end where he brings Marty home and Marty says, so how far are you going? And Doc says, about 30 years. Nice round number. I edited it so he says 1.21. So he said, so Doc, how far are you headed? 1.21 years. It's a nice round number. So $3.17. It's a nice round number. Joshua writes, your thoughts on Interstate 5 between Portland and Vancouver? Oh, buddy, how much do you want me to spoil? Because I've got a video coming out in December about Oregon trying to toll the freeways through Portland. Which, isn't it funny that the goal of tolling the freeways through Portland is to reduce freeway congestion? And one of the most congested freeways in the Portland region that I can think of is US 26 heading out of downtown to the west side. So I think like that'd be a good place to put a congestion price toll. But on the legislation that the Oregon legislature did, they only named Interstate 5 and Interstate 205, the two freeways that cross into Washington State. And so a part of me says, you know, I don't know if this was so much about congestion management as it is, because the tolls would run in the middle of the night too, if they do them. They haven't done them yet. The governor paused them. But it sure would make a lot of money off of traffic that's going back and forth, you know, California to Washington, you know, interstate commerce. And so, hey, I got a whole video getting into that whole shenanigans. That's coming up here in about a week or two, you know, when videos normally come out. It's right around the 15th-ish for Patreon and like 18th ish for YouTube. I'm still finishing up the last details on that. And then coming up in January, if all goes well, should be the 1-year update on the Portland to Vancouver I-5 replacement bridge. That old bridge that has the lift on it, and they stop the whole freeway every time a tall boat needs to go by. And so that was in the Oregon live stream. I was on that trip, was up there talking to the administrator for that project. And if all goes well, they're hoping that a year from this January, so January 26th, they'll have shovels in the ground and get started. And that's a project, depending on if the project happens. We have a new administration that may have a new Secretary of Transportation who may choose to program money in a different manner that could delay or shake up the nature of that project getting done. But assuming nothing changes, they're hoping to have that all put together and through environmental impact statement and everything by the end of 25, and he was hoping to have shovels in the ground by December. So that maybe if the project keeps going, it might be kind of fun to check in Portland about, okay, there are so many Waymos. One just went by, and here comes another. I've always been a skeptic of robo-taxis, but having now ridden in one and seeing, you know, we did the live stream 2 years ago, a like experimental Waymo, like back when they were still using a Lexus RX. One went by and I got so excited. And now these are so routine. They got the thing on the roof looking a little less science experiment, a little more sensible looking. And to see so many tonight as we've been walking around, I'm going, yeah, this may very well be a future that's happening. They're still pretty expensive. You know, I only rode the Waymo a couple of blocks in downtown LA, and I think it was $8. I didn't have to pay a tip. Another Waymo. They're everywhere. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to tip a driver, but I for these to really catch on, where like you have a measurable slice of the pie is robo-taxis, it really got to get the cost down, because for me to drive in my car, assuming free parking, which downtown you can't assume free parking, but let's say you can, you got to get the cost per mile similar to a car. We're looking at going, okay, I went 3 miles, my ride was under $1, you know, 30 cents a mile at most. And so you could hop at the car, go 3 miles, pay $1, then the robo-taxis have taken over, because you can't beat that even with a regular car. And even if it's like, okay, well, what about the wear and tear on the car? Okay, $1.50, $2. But I don't know, to go less than a mile and it was $8, it just still doesn't seem like a viable replacement, in my opinion. But okay, but back to what you were asking about the PDX Vancouver Bridge project. So, and what specifically you wanted to know? Just my thoughts on it. So, it's another project, like we were talking earlier about high-speed rail, or the path, or the new replacement rail train between New Jersey and Manhattan. Where there's a really serious transportation need, canceling a project doesn't make the need go away. And so it will just keep coming back. And it's interesting to see how public attitudes have shifted from 10 years ago, when they had Columbia River crossing, where they worked really hard on that and basically started with a completely blank slate and looked at everything. They looked at building a third bridge somewhere else. They looked at a tunnel. They looked at using an old rail bridge to just do light rail only. They looked at anything they could possibly do and put together something that was a consensus project that I think could have and should have worked. But for political reasons, the Washington State Legislature did not like that it had a light rail component, so they killed it. And that was that, and that was the end of the Columbia River crossing. It was dead. Oregon even tried to get in and try to save it themselves, and they just realized without Washington State's cooperation, the project wasn't going to happen. And so one could argue, who was an opponent of the bridge, hooray, we killed it, it's dead. But the demand to get light rail over the river, the demand to have a safe bridge that actually has shoulders, so if a car breaks down, they can pull to the side, the demand to have a pedestrian walk path that isn't this wide and 2 inches from the traffic, you know, it's that demand isn't going away. And so the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program came back because within a few years it was obvious that we're going to have to build something. And so it's come back. They're not completely, despite what I thought, they're not completely redoing all the research from the Columbia River crossing, the one 10 years ago. They basically built on it. They said, look, you guys did good homework before. So we're not going to go back and spend a ton of money trying to explore a third bridge. We're not going to explore a tunnel. We're not going to explore all these other things that you guys ruled out, because the conditions haven't changed. The old rail bridge is used for freight. It's not seismically safe. It's not a good rail bridge. The freeway needs are still there. You know, they need breakdown lanes. The seismic issues with the existing I-5 bridge basically dictate that even if you wanted to keep things the same, you'd have to demolish the old bridge and put completely new footings in, even if you built a new bridge that was exactly the same. And so the needs are still there. So let's do the same thing. So they're doing it. And if it gets killed for political reasons, 5 years from now, it'll come back again. And so I think the goal here with Greg Johnson being the administrator and his team and all the they don't call them stakeholders, they call them partners, but the city of Vancouver and the city of Portland and the pro-transit anti-car people and the pro-car anti-transit people and everybody, they're trying to get together and put that consensus together to give everybody enough of what they want that everybody can live with it and be happy with it. And I think they got something close. It's not quite as wide of a freeway as the Washington State car people want, but it's better than what they have. Right now they have a bridge that's 2.5 lanes in each direction, but they squeeze 3. It's really wild to drive on. Like I say, I have my little Honda, so I had a hoot driving back and forth on that when I was filming. You know, depending on which side of the river I was filming, and getting into my little narrow car in the narrow lane, and then kind of nailing the gas and having some fun. But if you drive an SUV, you feel really squishy, and if you drive a semi truck, forget about it. Sorry, I thought I saw another Waymo car, and it wasn't a Waymo car. It was a guy's helmet on a motorcycle. And so the being able to go from a 2.5 lane bridge to a 4 or 5 lane bridge. I think the Columbia River crossing, I think they had negotiated to 5, which was you'd have 3 through lanes and 2 auxiliary lanes that come on and dump off at different exits. And I think now the anti-car people are really uncomfortable with going, because that's a 10-lane bridge. You're going from effectively a 5-lane bridge to a 10-lane bridge, but they can live with 8. So that would be 3, another Waymo, 3 lanes in each direction with 1 auxiliary lane. And it is still wider because then you add the shoulders for the breakdowns, and that's like another 1.5 lanes. And what the anti-car people are worried about is they're saying, well, this could be a sneaky way of widening the freeway later, because the concrete's there and later you could stripe the shoulder. But ODOT has done a really good job of showing, like on the 205 bridge and things, that no, federal highway wants a shoulder, and you're not necessarily making the freeway faster by eliminating the shoulder and blowing it out and putting in a through lane, because as soon as a car breaks down, that through lane not only goes away, but you've destroyed all your other lanes because of the merging that people now have to do to get out of that outer lane to get out of the way. And so you go from, okay, we would have had 3 lanes to 4. Having a breakdown in that 4th lane, you go down to 0 or 1, because of all the delay. And so it's not worth it. And on top of it, Federal Highway Administration, who do get a say in this because it's part of the interstate highway system. States own their interstates. The federal government doesn't own anything. But because there's federal aid money to support interstate highways, maintaining them, they come in and say things they want. One of the things they want is they want shoulders. It's not safe, especially late at night, to have an idiot like me have my stupid little Honda break down because I have 350,000 miles and it broke, and stop in the lane, right? And especially in light traffic where people are going full speed, they might not see me. In my case, the alternator went out. I babied it off the freeway and it was fine. But let's say I didn't. Let's say it completely died and I was on the freeway with no shoulder. So I'm in a dark blue car in a freeway lane with just my reflectors, no lights because it's dark. The likelihood of a vehicle clipping along and just plowing into the back of me is quite high, because they're looking for lights. They're not necessarily looking for reflectors. Reflectors aren't going to return their headlights until they may be within, they may not have adequate stopping distance at that point. You want to have some fun? Go look up you remember, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Nightcrawlers, which are the freelance news photographers who, it's an LA thing, and LA local news, even with news dying, it's still competitive, and they want to have like the best video of like the crashes on the freeways and stuff. And so there was a movie called Nightcrawler, I think I had Jake Gyllenhaal, I can't remember who it was, about the seedy underbelly of these freelance photographers going out and literally chasing ambulances, like the Nightcrawlers. One of the companies is called Loud Labs. So if you ever want fun, the reason I bring this up is look up Loud Labs LA freeway crashes, and one of the most common ones you see at night is there was an accident, somebody's car is disabled, the lights aren't working, and people clipping along like the 101 freeway at 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, like we drive in SoCal, and not seeing the disabled car and just plowing into the car full, like you just all of a sudden hear brakes and that car's out. Well, its lights are out because it crashed, the battery's all over the freeway. And then another car comes and plows into it, and another car plows into it. And so if you can get the vehicle to the shoulder, you don't have that problem anymore. By the way, speaking of Nightcrawlers in real life, one of the best footage you'll find is there was another Waymo. The LA Metro local buses, the big orange buses, one of them, a gunman got on the bus and like shot another passenger and killed him. and then held the bus driver hostage and just told the bus driver to keep driving. If the bus driver drove really slow through LA with the gunman and the dead victim on the bus, and like cops are like kind of like in standoff position or whatever, and like following the bus really slow and trying to like be very careful that there aren't additional victims and stuff. And the just absolute cojones of this Nightcrawler photographer, the bus is going so slow, he just walks up to the bus and at walking speed gets video of the driver who's driving very cautiously, trying not to, and like gets a shot of the inside of the gunman and like the gunman glaring at him, and just like, you know, and like backs off and gets a wide shot, and you can see, I didn't know buses could do this, but like the electronic board above the windshield that says what route the bus is, it's flashing emergency, call 911, emergency, call 911. So like the driver had something he could push. And no news photographer who works for a TV station would ever get footage anywhere near that good or you know, foolish, because you don't want to get shot. So you're like, okay, well, I have a shot of like the bus and it's like 2 blocks away, and I have this like telephoto lens and it's all wobbly and I'm trying to get it. Like that's what a TV station photographer would do, because they're getting paid just over minimum wage, and it's just they majored in film in college. They don't know what to do with it, so they went to the TV station. The TV station said, we'll pay you $13 an hour, and they're out, you know. It's but these guys, these Nightcrawler guys, are nuts. They got their police scanner, and they're like probably drive like complete irresponsible maniacs getting out of the story. Like it is a whole world to them, and seeing, like I say, some of their crash photography and that bus story. If you're on a desktop computer, you go open a second YouTube tab, check that out. The bus hijacking in Los Angeles about 2-3 months ago, and it's just, the footage is unreal, man. So, okay, what were we talking about? The Portland Bridge? Anyway, yes, so that's kind of the update of what's going on with the Portland Bridge. I'll have more coming up in the video. They'll come out in January. We're going into more detail about some of the things Greg Johnson told me. But my takeaway is that project will happen. Even if it gets canceled, it'll be back in 5 years, and it will just keep happening until it happens. But I'm getting good vibes off of this one. I think this one's actually going to happen. Bad Drivers in North Central Maryland with another super chat. Thank you very much. You write, hey Rob, are you planning on coming out to Baltimore to do a video on the Key Bridge collapse and rebuild? It sounds like they selected a new design. Short answer, yes with a but. Long answer, no with an if. No, that's Reverend Lovejoy from The Simpsons. So right now, when the bridge collapsed, I almost jumped in my Honda and went out there. And I'm glad I didn't, because in that same stretch of mileage, I have had my car break 3 times. And so having it break down 3 times driving across the country. And flying is a bit impractical because I've got enough photography equipment. You bring more equipment than you need because equipment breaks, and you don't want to get all the way. I don't want to get all the way out to Maryland and then find I like I did today. I dropped my camera and wondered if it broke, and I'm trying to, you know, and bringing lots of extra bags and everything. And with the IRS mileage deduction, one way I can stretch your dollars is to drive, because my car gets good gas mileage, and so I actually more or less make money on the mileage deduction when I, you know, do it for work. Until my car wears out, and then I realize, the reason why the mileage deduction is so generous is it's anticipating the wear and tear on the car, which I have not been calculating in, because I've been just treating my car as free, and it was free until it started to break. So that's one of the concerns, is going to the trouble to get all the way out to Maryland to cover it. I want to make sure that I get out there and that I have the right thing to cover when I get there. And so it's a big enough project. I would give myself 75% odds that yes, I will get out there for that. Plus there are other Baltimore stories I could do too, like we were mentioning a minute ago, the I-70 section to nowhere in central Baltimore, and that might actually, that there are places where removing freeways makes sense. in this city, that when the earthquake damaged the Embarcadero, and that could be another live stream we could do at some point, is they took the freeway out. I take a scooter over there now, but there's no point showing you in the dark. So another live stream where we could start again at like 4 o'clock would be fun to do. But removing the I-70 section of the freeway to nowhere in Baltimore is a freeway removal that makes a lot of sense. There's another freeway removal they're talking about in Dallas. That one I don't know if it makes sense because there's a lot of through traffic on that one. It connects two very busy freeways together, and I don't think that's a smart removal. But I'm sensitive to them wanting to remove it because it does cut their downtown in half. But that's the other thing about a freeway removal is we're trying to make up for a mistake we made 60 years ago or whatever. You say, oh, this was a predominantly African American neighborhood and we tore it down on purpose to remove part of a neighborhood that we consider blighted, right? Okay. Who lives in the neighborhood now? Is it still a economically depressed area of people who are suffering from the smog and the traffic of the freeway? Or in the case of Dallas, has it gentrified into an area with sushi restaurants and high-end apartments? And in a way, that's a little bit insulting now to say, oh, well, now that all the poor people have moved away, now we can remove the freeway. You can go drive through the other neighborhoods that are poor, because we want the sushi restaurant neighborhood to be nice. And so, you know what I mean? Like, I hate to sound that cynical about it, but I think it's at least worth asking when you're doing an environmental impact statement. I'm like, well, who's impacted now? Do you have the accidental unintended consequence of maybe somebody who is economically depressed drives on that freeway a long way because they got to live somewhere affordable, and now we just made their commute longer so that the sushi restaurant's more pleasant? I mean, doesn't mean you don't still remove the freeway, but you gotta at least ask the question, But yeah, so short answer is yes, the Baltimore Bridge project is going to take some time. So I don't know if it'll be in 2025 I make it out there. A lot just depends on my car situation. You guys can all root for my car to break down, so then it forces me to buy another one sooner. But I like my car. I've had it since I graduated college, and it's stick shift and it's fun, and I don't ever want to give it up, but I also have to realize I've got work to do, So a lot of it will be watching to see, does a right moment pop up in the project where there's something that's a story. Going out for a ribbon cutting is not a story. It's very boring. You don't want to watch a story on a ribbon cutting. Like, I drove to Baltimore and they cut a ribbon and they promised they'd build a bridge and this is what it'll look like. The end. And we all had a good time. The end. Like, that's not interesting. But if we get into an aspect of like, oh, yeah, we got to do this really weird thing with the bridge, and yeah, bring your camera, I'll show it to you. That's a story. So, and then the question is it one that CBS News is going to go do? In which case, well, they've already done it. Or does it get so nerdy and obscure and weird that it's like, oh, CBS wouldn't, NBC News, CNN, ABC, whatever, they're not going to go cover that because it's so weird and obscure that their audience would find it boring. Perfect. That's the thing that you'll find interesting, So that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. And so right now, I haven't seen anything pop up with the Key Bridge that's made me go, yes, that's it. Let's go cover it. Plus, it's cold right now. Like, I don't really want to go to Baltimore I am trying to see if I can make it out to where I-40 fell apart from Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, which would get me out in that area. But it's so cold, I don't want to spend more than an extra minute out that way if I can help it. So I'm talking with them to see if they're still going to be doing anything in the spring when it might be a little warmer, because that would be a fun story to do too. And again, also comes down to my car. Driving to Tennessee is not exactly much shorter than driving to Maryland. So thanks again for your additional super chat, bad drivers in North Central Maryland. I appreciate it. Carlos Martinez, 1 penny shy of a double digit, but that's still cool. Carlos writes, in your video about the bike lane, two-way road in San Diego, you said neighbors say traffic spikes when the elementary school gets out. Back in my day, we walked to school. Videos on that? Yeah, I was mentioning some of that a moment ago, where we were talking about how, like, San Francisco here is a grid. And so grids are very efficient for directly getting where you need to go. But the downside of grids, and why grids went away in the 20th century, is when you have a car, they're also very efficient for cars to get where you want to go. And so when the big street like Mission here clogs up with traffic, during rush hour, well, then that gives people an excuse to say, oh, well, then I'll go a block over. And you start having the traffic sprawl its way out onto additional streets. And the problem is, to quote Syndrome from The Incredibles, when everything's super, nobody is. When every street's a through street, none of them are a through street. And so you end up with something that's kind of bad for everybody, because you have a street that's trying to handle the longer trips through town of somebody trying to go a mile or two and get there quickly, so they're wanting to go a little fast. But the streets aren't really set up for people to go fast because people's houses are on them. And so the theory is, okay, we have these through streets that are focused a little more on speed and through traffic and stuff. And then that comes at a cost of coming through on the other. So what does that have to do with schools? Well, in the 20th century, we forced people to drive more windy streets and things to force them onto the big streets. You think about life out in the suburbs, you have a little narrow, like, cul-de-sac road. A cul-de-sac road or a little loop road, a circle road, doesn't go anywhere. It just dumps back out to the same place. So you're not going to get any through traffic on that, because it's not a shortcut for anybody, right? So, and then the neighborhood streets are designed to push you to, like, oh, well, if you go onto this street, you can go a little bit faster. And then you go onto this street, you can go a little bit faster. And then eventually you get out to the big suburban, farm grid roads that are 5 or 7 lanes, 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, to and those are the roads that reward you for high speed, long distance, So one of the problems, another Waymo, by the way, they are everywhere. One of the problems of kids walking to school is if your school is inside the farm grid, okay, well, then they don't have to cross a big 5 or 7 lane street with 50-mile-an-hour cars. That's good. But the spaghetti noodles of all your streets, how efficient is it? Like, are there ways for kids to like, when you get to the end of a cul-de-sac, is there a walkway for them to cut through to the next block? And so I think a couple of things happen. One is kids don't walk to school because there's no efficient path to get to school, even if it is within your block. And so if you got to go this long, circuitous route anyway, that the path the car takes, because there's no shortcut for pedestrians, then you might as well just get a ride in a car, right? So that's number one. Number two, a lot of times the school is outside of the farm block. So now you're saying, oh, the kid has to cross the big arterial street that may be 5 or 7 lanes wide, 40, 50 miles an hour. And even with a crossing guard there, you start to think about your 8 or 9-year-old, and you go, I don't know if I want her crossing that big street, So you start having questions about it. And then a lot of school districts eliminated or made very difficult using the bus, the yellow school bus. Where I grew up, it's kind of surprising. You think Utah, being a red state, wouldn't have a lot of socialized things, but Utah is actually pretty progressive when it comes to mass transit and getting it built out, with broad Republican support for it. Like I say, you have Democrats like roads and Republicans like transit too. Like you just got to sell it the right way. And Utah is also very good about, the school districts tend to be very good about basically saying, if you live more than a certain distance from the school, throw the kid on the bus. and have them take the bus. And it's just included as part of the cost of the school. And so it shocked me when I came to California, a blue state, where you'd think they'd fund these things. But school districts are so chopped up into such small pieces here in the suburbs that a lot of the school districts don't operate a bus at all. And so if you just live too far away, it's like, well, get a ride from somebody. Like there's no way to get there if you're long distance. So it creates a culture where the parents, since most of the parents are outside the district, outside the zone of walkability anyway, they might as well drive their kid anyway. So it's kind of a combination of not funding the yellow buses and making them easy to get, another Waymo. It's a combination of bad street grids that are not real walkable. And then last, just having schools be beyond on the opposite side of a major street. So, so then going back and saying, okay, well, what was life like in the 1990s? And I go, well, my elementary school, I didn't have to cross any big streets. It was a 1950s layout, the suburbs near my home where my parents raised me. And so the streets were not quite as circuitous. They took some funny angles, but they were pretty direct. I remember one street actually kind of took a bit of a diagonal in favor of the school. It's very gentle, but it worked. And so I never felt like I was backtracking or anything. I was on 25-mile-an-hour streets the whole way. And so from 3rd, 4th grade on, as long as I was traveling with friends, my parents had no problem with me coming home from school on my own with my bike. And but I recognize that if I think about other neighborhoods, especially more modern ones, the road grids, I think, have kind of deteriorated, where they're built more and more to look pretty and less about actually trying to get the pedestrian there. And so there's little ways you can cheat. Like I say, if you require your developers to say, okay, you can put a cul-de-sac bulb in, but every time you do, you need to allow the sidewalk to continue to the next block. If you're looking on Google Maps and want to see what I think is a good example, look up Redlands, California, Redlands, and go to any other neighborhoods built back in the 80s and 90s that have cul-de-sac bulbs. But the bulbs, rather than ending at a house, end at the next street. And sometimes they even have the sidewalk of the cul-de-sac bulb seamlessly merge with the sidewalk on the outside of the development. And so it still stops vehicle traffic from cutting into that neighborhood. You still get that dead end effect of a suburban cul-de-sac, but the pedestrian grid connects together. And I think, I laugh at, there's a new subdivision that went in by where I grew up. And like I say, most of the neighborhoods back where I grew up were built in the 50s and 60s, and it all connected together. Their goal was to build a unified city where all the streets connected together, and that made it reasonably good for pedestrian access. But some of the neighborhoods south of where I grew up were built in the 70s. Those had a lot of cul-de-sacs that didn't go through, but the streets still connected. And the most recent development that went in within the last 5 years had one road in and one road out, and it didn't even try to connect to the adjacent streets to the east or west or south. And they even have where they paved where the fire truck could crash through a gate from the one neighborhood into the new one, but it's always locked because they you talk to the neighbors in the new development, they say, oh, well, we don't want people from that old development. They might be kind of sketchy. They might break into my car. They're gonna, and the traffic, they're gonna cut through our neighborhood. And then you talk to people in the old neighborhood and they go, I don't know, those people in the new development, they might break into my car, and the traffic, all those new houses, I don't want them coming down my street. So we end up with the worst of both worlds, where everybody ends up driving longer distances to go around each other's neighborhoods because we couldn't connect them together. Because in the 1950s, they wanted to connect the neighborhoods together, and today everybody wants to basically live inside a little fortress. And I just laugh. Like, go to any modern suburb and look at like where an apartment complex and a neighborhood connect together. And there are crash gates for the fire department. You could tie these developments together. They don't even allow pedestrians through. That's what really frosts me, is I'm going, well, the like okay, I get it. You don't want vehicle traffic cutting through. I think it's a wash. You're going to drive in each other's neighborhoods fairly equally, but whatever, okay. But at least let people on foot walk through. And it's the same thing. Well, we can't have the scary of people in the apartment complex coming into our neighborhood, and in the neighborhood, you know, we can't have those scary people from the neighborhood coming into our apartment complex. They might break into our car. Well, they might break into our car. They're just people on both sides. And then you can say, oh, okay, well, it's an income thing. The renters are more likely to commit crimes because they're poor. All right, fine. Well, then what about two neighborhoods where people own their houses? And the houses are similar size, and the incomes are similar. And yet you'll have a bunch of cul-de-sacs all pointed at each other with no way to walk through. So you can't trust those people in that neighborhood. You can't trust them, but you can trust people in our neighborhood, even though they're strangers too. And vice versa. Oh, we can't trust people in that neighborhood because they're scary. And so it's like this kind of like all the problems we're dealing with in the world with politics and weird foreign leaders wanting to start wars and neighborhoods not wanting to connect to each other, go back to the stupid instinct that's just like deep in our brain that served us well as humans for eons, but in a modern world is bad for us. And it's this idea of, oh, there's this little tribe of people that think like me and act like me and look like me, and they're okay. But that group of people, well, they look different and they sound different and they eat different foods, and I can't trust them. And it's so dumb, right? Like if you think with like your thinking brain, you're like, they're just other human beings that really aren't that different from me, right? But we default to this idea of those people are scary, but people like me, we're awesome. And so we like over the people we have affinity for, like we like them too much. We let them get away with too much. We overlook their shortcomings too much. But then people that we presume are different from us, we are overly critical of them. And and we call that, it's tribalism. It's a human instinct. It served us well for a long time, but in the modern world, it sucks. And it makes us be dumb. And it makes us build dumb subdivisions where they don't connect together. And as a result, all the kids get a ride to school with their parents because they have to go around a long way that would have been a short and easy walk if the neighborhoods connected together, but we didn't connect them together because that development's scary and mine isn't. So anyway, enough of my soapbox on that. So that's my take on why all the kids walk to school. So, but thanks for your question and your super chat, Carlos. I appreciate that. Well, we're coming up on 4 hours here, so I wonder, let's see if there's anything interesting on the live chat. And any last, if now's your chance if you have a super chat question to toss it. But otherwise, I had the continental breakfast at my motel, and I ate a lot. But it's probably time for me to go have my lunch and dinner here pretty quick. So, but let's see if there's anything fun going on before we jump out. CJ Brick writes, "What would be your favorite state DOT based on how they build and do things?" I mean, I'm biased. Utah gets stuff done pretty quick. When they do cut corners, they do it in a way that makes sense. There's some dumb things Utah's done, but I tell you, rebuilding like 26 miles of freeway in 2.5 years sounds pretty awesome compared to what I'm used to in California. I do like California DOT, Caltrans. When they do, their projects are top notch. I think they're the best in the country. They're very slow at delivering them. They use a lot of union labor, so it's expensive. But because they do hire union labor, they get good work done. So I know the engineering and the finished projects on Caltrans are always excellent. Nevada DOT are good. They kind of remind me of Utah. I haven't had as much experience back east, and so there may be some really good DOTs back east as well. Yellow Hornet 285 writes, "Preach! I work for a municipality in Long Island, and all they ever install are cul-de-sacs and nothing ever connects. It's maddening." I know, and it's just tribalism. It's just this human instinct that doesn't make sense. It's bad for us, but we do it because it makes us feel good in the moment. We don't trust our neighbors. We trust all the strangers on our street that we never meet, but heaven forbid the strangers on that street. Jesse writes, over a 3-hour live stream. Well, now over 4 hours. Jesse writes $2. Couple of bucks. Thank you for the live stream. Well, you're welcome. And Nerves 007 says, go get yourself a burrito. I am in California, so. Okay, well, I appreciate sharing the city with you and showing you the other Lombard Street that got too dark and we had cell service issues and stuff. But it's a lot of fun. It's, you know, it's really easy to stereotype a place and say, the city's in a death spiral. And the truth is, most of it's just fine. Other than you're getting your car broken into, that's a problem we got to deal with. But and absolute out of control unaffordability, but that's not exclusive to here. So, okay, well, you all have a good night, and I will we'll see you sometime soon. Take care.